All right, I know Ruthina's joined us a little bit late, but I think it's time. So let's get started. We'll call this board meeting to order. I've got right at 5 o'clock on August 18th. For those listening on the audio, my name is Sean Eystone, and I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. Start by introducing some of the folks on this meeting. We have board directors JP Clausen, Charlie Easton, Janet Godwin, Paul Ressler, and Lisa Williams. Interim Superintendent Matt Digner, and Recording Secretary Kim Colvin. Before we get started, I'd like to say a few words. I think that we can all agree that 2020 has been a difficult one, and we were all reminded just how difficult last week with the storm that blew through our area. Almost everyone here and around our communities lost power for some amount of time and had varying amounts of damage. Very encouraged by what I've seen from our community with neighbors helping neighbors and even folks heading out to other neighborhoods and cities. We've come a long way in the past week in regards to cleanup from the storm, but we want to recognize that there are folks still out there that are struggling from the aftermath of this storm. There are people still without power. There's people struggling to get access to meals, and in some cases have literally lost the roof over their heads. So I ask you to please keep those folks in mind and help out whenever you may be able. And while we have all felt the burden of this trying time, some of you have also felt the stress of this time in a much more personal way. Last week, our community saw the tragic death of one of our students. Ezra Sheldon was a student at Southeast Junior High. We would like to express our deepest sympathies to Ezra's family, as well as the City High and Southeast communities. I did not know Ezra myself, so I would like to take just a brief moment of silence for those who did know Ezra to remember him in their own way. All right, thank you. And just please remember that we're stronger together as we navigate these difficult days. Before we get into our agenda, I would like to remind everyone that we are trying to stay consistent with any in-person public board meetings. And as such, we will not be answering in real time any questions that come across via the Q&A or chat options on the Zoom call. Board members and the admin team do see these and are taking note of these things to see what we can address in the future. However, we do have a community comment period to start the meeting, and so we will move into that now. If you would like to comment, please use the raise hand feature and I will call on you, and then Kim will grant you access to speak and you will have 4 minutes to speak. So I will open it up to community comment. And it looks like we have a couple. So let's start with Nicole Scott. Thanks, Kim. Nicole, you should be first, but you'll need to unmute, it looks like. Okay. Did we lose Nicole? It looks like perhaps maybe we did. So Kim, let's move down to Becky Burke.
Hold on here for just a second. Well, I cannot get my big screen back to allow that. Hold on here just a second. There we go. All right. Becky Burke.
Hi, good evening. My name is Becky Burke, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the school nurses in the Iowa Community School District. As of now, our 11 school nurses provide healthcare services to 21 elementary buildings, 3 junior high schools, 3 high schools, our Transition Services Center, and our alternative high school. As our district has added more students, more buildings, and more students with chronic health concerns, our nursing staff has been stretched incredibly thin. For example, we currently have more students in grades K through 6 with type 1 diabetes requiring insulin injections than we do nursing staff. This causes frequent issues since most elementary lunches are at the same time. Due to our inability to be on hand at every building, some healthcare related tasks such as tube feedings, medication administration, and urinary catheterizations must be delegated to our paraeducators and building secretaries. And I have to pause here just to give a big, huge shout out and thank you to these individuals for stepping up for us. Understanding the potential risks this may create, the Iowa Board of Nursing recently issued a memo setting forth minimum standards of practice for registered nurses, including recognizing and understanding the legal implications of accountability. Accountability includes using professional judgment in assigning and delegating activities and functions to unlicensed assistive personnel. However, unlicensed personnel cannot perform some nursing activities. One of these is insulin administration, which I referenced earlier. Another includes making initial assessments, which will be occurring routinely when we return to school, as we will be identifying and assessing for potential COVID-19 symptoms. Furthermore, this memo states that if unlicensed assistive personnel do provide nursing care in the school setting, a registered nurse must be in the proximate area. They explain proximate area to mean that the registered nurse analyzes the qualifications of the caregiver in relationship to the needs of the student in determining the appropriate distance within the building and the time necessary to be readily available to this caregiver. As it stands now, this is logistically impossible as we are staffing multiple buildings. This upcoming year, we, the nurses, have been asked to help public health with contact tracing in the district, which is the process of identifying persons who may have come into contact with a COVID-19 infected person, as well as possibly providing COVID testing in the schools. Both tasks that again cannot be delegated and will be very challenging to manage as we travel between buildings. We have academic and professional training to provide valuable help to this district. We actively, willingly chose to become registered nurses to provide care to people even in times of a pandemic. We love what we do and are proud to work for a district that values their students and staff. We, the school nurses, ask for your help by funding additional positions so that our district can provide even better quality and safer care, especially in a time when our community requires it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Becky. Appreciate that. And next up we have D, Kim.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'll just use up just a few seconds. I just want to take a minute to follow up what Becky said about the nurses. Who've been with the district for 20 years, also had the privilege of working in health office and working along with a bunch of awesome kids that are now graduating and getting married. But put upon the paras was a lot of duties that a nurse really should take upon, but the school nurses were pulled thin, and that thin was stretching to break. And so I agree with her that we need more help, especially with all this stuff going on that we're going back to. I didn't mean to bring that in. I just wanted to butt myself in here to say I appreciate everything everybody has been doing for us and for our babies, because inside those brick walls, that's who we work for, which are our kids, because that's who they are. And I appreciate you taking so much of your time and your life to make sure that our kids count. So thank you guys, and keep fighting the good fight. That's a saying I've always said. So we're gonna win this. So thank you guys.
All right. Thank you, Dee. Appreciate that. Looks like that is all we have. So we can go ahead and move into our agenda. And the first thing on there is our approval of the agenda, although that should say today's date, I believe.
Sure should. I'll change that.
So I'd entertain a motion to approve that.
We approved the agenda for today.
Second.
All right, Kim?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, so the next item is our consent agenda. I remember looking at the bills when this meeting was last week and not coming up with a whole lot. So is there any questions or comments in regards to the bills? All right, are there any items that directors would like to pull? All right, if not, I would entertain a motion.
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, there's no further discussion. Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, thank you. We can move down to our discussion items. The first one up here is our follow-up from our equity conversations. I know Matt's going to kind of walk us through, but to kind of give a recap, right? We have had a few meetings now, meeting with different groups to, seek some clarity on some things, and both questions that we have had and questions that other groups have posed to us. And as we try and formulate our responses there, I think as a general rule, administration has, put together quite a few things, but we're looking to put some clarity to that and also some prioritization to some of those items that we need to do both as an administration and as a board. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Matt to kind of walk us through.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Sean. Like Sean had given an overview of there, we've had a couple listening opportunities with Iowa Freedom Riders and the district's equity committee. You also see their demands or notes attached to the agenda there, along with over a month ago, we had provided some action steps that we suggested that the district could take to satisfy some of those needs that were identified in those listening opportunities. And so I'm happy to walk through this document line by line and just kind of maybe add some context to what that entails. But I think the big takeaway for tonight would be to try to quickly identify what work needs to move forward in an expedient fashion and which one of those pieces or components needs to have some urgency around it. We know that it's all urgent and important work, but we also want to do the work at a high level and know that if we try to bite off more than we can do at a high level, then everything will not reach the potential that it could have. And so I think trying to recall those conversations that the board was able to be a part of and think about where the groups expressed some urgency around that would be important to hear back tonight and develop some consensus on what needs to happen first and what we need to keep our eye on as we continue to move forward. And some of these things are pieces you'll obviously be familiar with, as the district's talked about for a while, and they're parts of our comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, as you see where we linked those items in. And so we know that these are identified goal areas and work areas for the district, but again, trying to set some priority and urgency around components of that need to happen sooner rather than later, I think is important. And so if you pull up that district action step document, it's divided into board action steps and administrative team action steps. And the board action steps identified there would be quarterly reports delivered to the board on the diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, and mentioned here is presented with data and metrics on progress towards the goals. And so that's always been a plan, as we approved that last December, that we were to come back with some of those quarterly updates and include the progress points along with those, and try to give some data around where we're making progress and where we maybe still have some opportunities to pursue. And then the second one was a request from the groups that there should be a statement of support for an ICCSD Board of Education that reflects the larger community, meaning racially and economically diverse. So I might pause there to see if there was a conversation or further direction that would want to be provided in either of those regards before we take on the administrative team action steps.
Can we try, you don't need to give me the details right now, but I'd like to put together maybe a calendar of kind of expected meeting dates that we get the quarterly reports, so we can be pretty clear when they're going to be. Is it going to be like the beginning of each quarter, the middle, or the end, or something like that, just to kind of have it out there as a expectation?
Right, I think that's excellent point, Sean, and that was a piece I was remiss to mention in the beginning, would be establishing a timeline around some of this work, and that could be in conjunction with those quarterly reports. But I do think setting a calendar out for when those can be expected would be important for the board to have. So we can do that definitely on the quarterly reports right away. Any other questions on those, or want me to keep rolling through here?
Let's move along.
We'll keep going. Okay.
Welcome,
So
Murphy.
administrative team action steps. You see 9 different items that are in this document prepared here for you. So the first one talks about an audit of current discipline protocols and procedures. I referenced that this was originally created by the Georgetown Committee, and I know as we've had these conversations, some people felt that while that work was a collaborative effort, maybe how that work got buttoned up could have been improved. But I do think that there was a lot of voices involved in that conversation. But there was specifically an ask for reviewing language and practices that may target students of color. And so here it's suggested to do an audit of those protocols and procedures. We've talked for a while about including restorative practices into those protocols and processes. And then the second point that's mentioned there is identify the team and schedule in a schedule. So speaking to that timeline component we had just mentioned, review the discipline protocols and procedures. So that's item 1. I think I'll just kind of pause after these to see if there's any questions or pieces that people think need to be added in, and then maybe we come back at the end to say which one of these have a greater priority than the others, if that works for folks. I think it'd be especially important for us to note if we're missing the mark on anything or anything else that should be added from what you heard from the groups or feedback you'd have for us. Okay. So the next one is review current law enforcement involvement throughout the district. And I think this one was a little broader than just looking at it in the discipline lens from what we'd heard from some different community groups or from the different listening opportunities we'd had. And so a couple points here specifically about provide data to track law enforcement interactions with students on campus. So whether or not that resulted in a discipline event, there was a desire to know how often law enforcement was interacting with students. And then the second point was provide more information and transparency around the care assessment team and process. I think there's been a lot of questions since we've embarked upon that work about what that is or what that isn't. And so the continual conversation and making sure people are aware of that. I know that's that feels like a more urgent one for us as it's something new we're taking on. And so we wanted to make sure that was noted here as well. Number 3 speaks specifically to reviewing the referral process for Tate High School and presenting disaggregated referral data. And so kind of 4 big components here. Identify steps to address disproportionate enrollment at Tate. So first step would obviously be to see what that enrollment is and what that demographic breakdown looks like. Establish protocols and training for staff as they discuss Tate as an option for students. And that probably involved more of our interactions with kids at our home high schools, talking about how Tate was referred to as if it's being referred to as a consequence or an opportunity, and making sure that that language that we are careful with. in all circumstances there. So we knew that was an important piece to include from what we'd heard from the groups. Reviewing the rigor and standards of an alternative high school education. That one spoke to the feedback that the different groups shared around once they complete their education at Tate, what opportunities are afforded to them afterwards that they're able to access appropriately, and how we're setting them up for success post high school. And the last one, sustained commitment to staff professional development in the area of restorative practices, cultural proficiency, culturally responsive teaching, and equity. I think that just speaks to the overall commitment to PD for our staff working at Tate or working at our home high schools to keep students at their home high school if and when that's the best option for them, so that they have a better chance of being successful in their home high schools instead of Tate being an option for them if that could have been avoided. Certainly not a takeaway from or an effort at trying to diminish Tate's ability to be successful, but I think just more knowing if students can stay at their home high school and be successful, that's the goal. And if we provide staff to that effect, staff PD to that end, that should help. Questions on anything with Tate? And then the last one, or the bullet point number 4 there, really just speaks to that overall professional development piece. So it mirrors the one you see in 3D and talks about just that is a need for all of our staff across the board. And so that would even be in our elementary schools or just in general, so that we're being the best we can be and providing those restorative practices, culture responsive teaching, and equity in everything we do. Obviously, again, linked to our diversity, equity, inclusion goals, but that PD need is a large one for us as we think about our interactions with students, how they interact with our curriculum, how they interact with our teaching, and all components. Anything specific to PD? Number 5 talks about committing to adding an evaluation standards for all employee evaluations, specifically addressing culturally proficient and restorative practices and fair and equitable treatment to students, families, colleagues, and supervisors. So I think the big thing we heard in this one consistently was an effort to hold people accountable to high standards. And so while we want to provide support, as we talk about through professional development, we also think it's important to have an accountability component in there, and that's for administrators, teachers, and like it says, all staff, that is our expectation in the Iowa City Community School District, and that is where we need people to be. And so we need to offer that support, but there also needs to be the expectation that this is how we are expected to be as professionals in this district. So we've worked in conversation with the Iowa City Area Education Association, and they've actually brought this one to us as a good idea that we should consider. And so we're thankful for their support on that end, and would like to get moving on this one too. So any questions about adding in an evaluation standard?
Sean, I'd just like to note that the way I look at this, I think number 5 and 4 go together, obviously, very closely. And I think number 5 is one of the things we can do that has a good gives us a good opportunity to change outcomes in the district. So I'm looking forward to seeing us work on that.
Thanks, Charlie.
Matt, just on that one, to clarify the evaluation part, because I know it's been asked before, but everybody, teachers and administrators, are we still sort of in the beginning stages of that?
Yeah, we would see that for all. So teachers, administrators, and really staff in general. And so that we would need to add in an evaluation component, whatever shape their evaluation takes. You know, for teachers and administrators, there's set standards. For other employee groups, we use different tools, but we would see that as a necessary component to add in for all of our staff.
Thank you.
You bet. So number 6 speaks specifically to curriculum. Conduct a curriculum audit to ensure that an anti-racist K-12 curriculum, as well as compliance with the district's comprehensive diversity and equity and inclusion plan. And so here we talk specifically about American Studies audit current American Studies courses to ensure that there's an anti-racist and culturally relevant concepts and practices are woven through the course. And then second, create a required Black history course to be considered for adoption in the 21-22 program of studies. And so this would be a sizable change for us as well. We've had several conversations previously about ethnic studies, and we have an ethnic studies elective course. This would be a required course as it states there, and we would consider it for adoption for next school year, but that would be work we could undertake throughout the school year this year to build that course and figure out where that best fits in our students' experience. And then of course, looking at our American Studies courses to look at that anti-racist and culturally relevant teaching as we go throughout there too. So that's what we speak to with curriculum. I know there was obviously some talk also when we spoke about curriculum across the curriculum, like it says K-12 curriculum, and it's probably not just linked to social studies. We don't want to just think that how we handle curriculum is only in social studies. If we're trying to be anti-racist or culturally relevant, it's easy to make that link sometimes, but there's also work to do in other curriculum areas. As we separated out those two bullet items A and B there under those maybe seem like the two most immediate things we could start with, but there was also obviously other work to do as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add there, Matt. And, you know, we've talked about it in the past that it isn't just social studies, but it is the area that kind of takes this question more often than not, right? History becomes the focal point. But we do need to address our whole curriculum, but I recognize the need to, you know, take steps that we can accomplish change with, right, and move forward. So it's a kind of thing we added on there that it is another thing that, you know, to look at the rest of the curriculum, you know, and these are just like the first couple points we're looking at, be very explicit there. But
right, and I think that point about the difference between anti-racist and culturally relevant concepts is important for people to understand too. When we think about those different components, anti-racist teaching involves teaching some hard history and some difficult concepts at points, and it may be different than the way it was taught to us in school, and that there can be a different take on some of those happenings, events, and people. And culturally relevant tries to allow for more of our students to see themselves in that curriculum and some of those components. And so they're really different. And I think that's an important distinction for us to make and consider as we review those curriculum opportunities too. But like you said, Sean, it's more than just social studies. And so we know we have work to do in other areas too, but those seem to be two ones that come up frequently in the conversations. Number 7 then talks more about disaggregating and presenting course enrollment data by race to ensure high expectations for all students. And so when we think about different courses that are offered to students and how they're enrolled into those courses, trying to break that down, we've done work previously here around our advanced placement courses and trying to recruit and retain more Black and Brown students into those higher level courses. But as we look at other curricular areas, or our honors courses, I think there's obviously a tremendous amount of work for us to do there when we break down the demographic data about who is in which courses and why does that happen. And so really the first step in that is having a broad understanding of what is going on. And so that's why we start with disaggregate and present that course enrollment data, because I think as we show that and present some of that data, it may or may not be shocking. I think it is different, but when you see it actually lined up to those classrooms and into those sections about our demographic splits and how when we look at that disaggregated data, that speaks to the work we have to do, that if we really want to have high expectations for all students, they need equal or equitable access. When we talk about achievement gaps, a lot of times it's opportunity gaps. If we're not giving the same opportunities across the board, then we're going to constantly have those achievement gaps. And so I think that's an important one to look at and why it's mentioned there. Questions on number 7? Question number 8 talks about creating a district ombudsman position to help students, families, and staff navigate and report racial bias concerns and complaints. I think in particular to this question is we've seen some of our students gravitate towards social media to tell stories and about their experience that hasn't been positive in our district. We know that sometimes our traditional communication channels or complaint channels aren't always readily accessible or known to students and staff when they encounter problems. And so the effort around posting an ombudsman position and the request to move forward with that would be really as an advocate or a person that could help students and staff navigate those complaint processes when issues do arise. And so they would not handle the investigation, but they would be alongside that person as they are trying to work through that process in a complaint so that they can, again, navigate the system as they try to rectify and get a resolution to the experience they would have endured through that. So we've talked a little bit about this one before, as you guys have seen it a couple times, but that's number 8. So are there questions about that or how that role would work?
Hey, Matt, on the Say Something, can you just remind me who gets that information once it's reported through the Say Something like app or whatever, the text messaging?
Yeah, and so when the building is identified, then the building administrator receives that concern to investigate it, and then usually the appropriate supervisor by level there as well. So Kristen, I don't know, I might be missing everybody that gets those reports, but that would be a quick one. So those anonymous, Director Rossler is referring there to the anonymous reporting tool. And so when those anonymous reports come in, the building administrators are alerted with an email that they can see those reports. Sometimes there's enough information to follow up on, sometimes there's not, but they do always receive those. Kristen, I don't know if you have anything else you'd want to add in on those. I know you forward a lot of those for us to the appropriate people, even if maybe they wouldn't have received them on the first time, or we make sure we flag them so that people don't lose them either.
No, Matt, I think you covered it with who all receives those reports. You're accurate in that.
Well, Jeremy and I actually also get them, Paul. So they do come, the ones that we also get them, a couple of different people at the ESC get them as well. Amy, I can't remember, Amy, if you get them initially as well.
Yeah, I get them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so supervisor by level, that's what I said. So I think that connects back. So if it's a secondary one, you know, in my past role, I would have received those, and a lot of times would loop back to the principal to make sure that there's been some follow-up. And also, I think then if an administrator is obviously mentioned in those, that's why we have ESC folks in the loop on those as well, in case there's a concern that needs to be followed up on that end. And then number 9 says update and present a plan to recruit and retain teachers and administrators of color, including a focus on a Grow Your Own program. And so Grow Your Own is a piece that we've talked to you guys about a couple times in the past as well. And so I think the request here was to, again, update and present that plan, ensure teachers and administrators of color assigned a mentor that best fits their identified needs and desires. I think we've learned that also through our conversations with our teachers and administrators of color, that doesn't always happen, and that's a critical component for them, or at least being able to be posed the question about if that would be something that would be desired for them, and just asking and being more intentional in that aspect as we try to recruit and then obviously retain them and hope that they have a good experience in our district and do what we can or everything we can to support them for that matter. And so there was an intentional point to also mention that as we talk about Grow Your Own. So that's the list. And so obviously, you know, there's a sizable amount of work underway there. And so Charlie had kind of spoke to number 4 and 5 being a large priority. I think it would be valuable for us to hear if there was kind of comments from other board members or consensus around which of those maybe held a larger priority than others. We know they're all a priority and all important work to engage in. But as we think about establishing some timelines, not only the quarterly reports around the diversity, equity, inclusion plan, but some of these items, kind of where people are at from their thinking and from the conversations they've been a part of.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I agree with Charlie. I think 4 and 5 will help pave the way for some of the work that needs to be done. But I also would like to see if the board would be in agreement on including 6. as a priority because that addresses our curriculum and ensuring that we're presenting anti-racist material to our students. So those are the three that I would really like to see as priorities.
I would agree with Ruthina on 6.
I was going to throw in that I think we've talked about this in the past, Matt, that, you know, we can write all the policies and things like that that we want, but if we're not, you know, changing the culture, right, really driving it, the culture change and how we are just operating as a district, the policies don't mean a lot. And I'm looking at the pieces that are, you know, what are we teaching, who's teaching it, and how are we teaching it? And those things stand out to me. So I look at the curriculum of what we're teaching is important, and the growing your own and having a staff that reflects our community to do that work is important, but also giving the PD to all of our teachers that are going to try and teach this different curriculum from what they've been used to in the past, right? Being able, you know, give them the supports there. So those three things together are very important, I think. And if those are done very well, I think we will start to see improvement in some of our other areas, because those are going to help drive some culture change. As I was kind of going down 1 through 9, it's hard to take any of them out of being a priority. But I do think that those 3 can help drive change to some of the other ones, like just how we do discipline, when law enforcement might be called for things. If we're, you know, doing some of the rest of that with fidelity, I think we'd be having far-reaching stuff if we target those. So that's my take.
Thanks for that, Sean. And you reminded me of that conversation that we were able to have at the board retreat too, which I think was super valuable in this effort, as you guys looked at your board goals and identifying, you know, that the culture change has to happen, right, for those other things. And you connected that nicely to policy there, that policy can be written very well, but at the same time, that culture change has to take effect. And so how do we start to change culture? And I think you guys are hitting at some of those core aspects in there about how we start to make some inroads to do that. So appreciate that perspective. I think that board retreat conversation was one I should have brought up at the beginning too, because we did kind of talk about priority in that way when we talked about some of the board goals as well.
So Sean, I'm sorry. So which ones were you most interested in, please?
You're muted now, Sean.
I'm on the wrong screen to unmute it. So 6 curriculum, as you guys had mentioned, and I think 9, where it's not just grow your own, but really working on the hiring of our teachers, administrators of color, and supporting them. I think that's more than just getting them here, but supporting them once they are. And then the PD part, which I guess is 4, and I guess it's part of 3 as well, as Matt mentioned. So, but overall 4, 6, and 9, I think.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I too am really focused on culture. You know, after that conversation at the board retreat, and knowing that is going to have to change. And so for me, kind of 4 and 5, like Charlie said, I think 4 and 5 go together. You know, once we're, you know, if we're going to add in a really specific evaluation piece about, you know, whatever it is, anti-racism or cultural responsiveness, then we got to make sure we're training folks on what that is. In addition, like has been said, if folks are going to teach this curriculum, it needs to be done well, because you can have really good curriculum and it can be presented in a way that's, you know, just as harmful as poor curriculum. And with that, kind of 9 really rises to the level for me as well. You know, I do want to point out that one thing that is still sticking with me is Deja Taylor's comment about, you know, she's been working on this for 4 years and nothing feels different. And so I'm really keen on having something in place that feels very different, which is why I really like the idea of an ombudsman. You know, somebody who can be there to guide families through, you know, really an advocate for families, so that if you're having an issue, that person is going to help you through the process. I think we have so many different things going on. You know, how many kids don't even know we have a say something text, or don't know where to go to report. And so to me, you know, that one does rise to the top for me, because I think that could be something that we do right away that sends not just sends a message, but is an actual thing that people can go to and say, this is the district doing something very, very differently. And the reason I also kind of prioritize that is because I don't know of public schools that do that. I mean, some of these other things I think we'll go ahead and we'll do. I could see the Ombudsman getting kind of lost, because maybe it is complicated and maybe we don't quite know how to do it. And I could see that going away for that reason. So that's where I'm at.
Sean, if I could just chime in a little bit. I actually want to channel JP a little bit in terms of Deja's comments around a lot of work over the last few years and things not feeling different. And so the ones, I agree with the prioritization that's been put forward. I think some of those things are going to take time from a PD culture change perspective. That takes time for change to be felt. And so I like the Ombudsman focus. I think that would be something immediately that we could put into place that would help things feel differently. And it's also the reason why I feel like number one, I know I'm piling on, but the review of the discipline protocols, I think, and maybe that's something that could be done maybe in conjunction with the Ombudsman, but I feel like a review of those discipline protocols to make sure we're not targeting students of color, that could be something that students would feel more immediately as well, so that they could feel a change happening in how people are responding to situations that are occurring, you know, in school buildings. And so I think there's a balance here as we think about priorities around, you know, this longer term sustainable cultural change and the pieces of work that we need to do to support that, whether it's PD and hiring teachers of color. But if we can do some things that students are going to feel immediately, I'd maybe put some weight on Ombudsman and also the discipline protocols. My 2 cents.
So I just like to add, I would support Janet and JP's perspectives also. And I realize I'm getting to the point where I'm saying, well, all the 9 things are important. And I think we all know that, and Matt, and I'm sure you do too. I do, to me, 8, an Ombudsman, 1, an audit of current practices, and 2, reviewing current law enforcement involvement. Those are things that can be done fairly readily, and I suspect they would help with the issues we've heard from students and not seeing the districts or the climate in classrooms and in schools changing very much.
Any other directors want to weigh in? I would suggest just to try and, you know, help direct Matt and the team, perhaps to do something very similar to, you know, what we did with our board goals at our retreat, is kind of try and get everybody's, you know, top 3, and we'll put them together to get a better consensus. I think it's important to recognize that whatever the top 3 are that we're going to put more emphasis on does not mean that the other 6 are going away, right? They're all going to need to be addressed sooner than later, really, but we're just trying to put some energy behind a top few. So I would suggest maybe board members sending me, you know, their top, say, 3 numbers there, and I'll accumulate it like we did our goals. Would everybody be amenable to something like that? I'm seeing some heads nods for all the folks that are listening to a quiet recording right now. So we'll try and do that, Matt. So I think you kind of got a sense of a few that rose to the top there, but we'll try and make sure we get it a little more concise for you. Any more discussion from the board members, the admin team on this item before we move further into our agenda?
No, I think that's helpful. And, I think part of what we can continue to work to do is trying to kind of chart some work and give a work plan for the year around these night items and what that might look like. And, you guys are right. I mean, they're all important. That's why they're all on the list and why they're all identified. And so some of them are obviously easier to move on quicker than others, and we can pull together at different points. And so I think that was helpful. Appreciate it.
All right. And if anybody, any board member, if you think of things that we need to add on there, send that along too. I would just add, and maybe it's a more of a board action item than it is an admin action item, but when it comes to the Grow Your Own program, one of the comments in our listening posts have been, we need to put our money where our mouth is in that regard and put some dollars to it. So I think as a board, that's something we can take on as a discussion as to, how much money we would want to put towards that program for it to be successful. I think if we don't put some sort of context around that, it might struggle. So I think it would be good for us to further that conversation. So we can add that as a board item as well. All right. So we can move on to our next action or discussion item, and that's our board member vacancy. So we've got Paul for one more week, and we're going to give him a lot of homework between now and next Tuesday for practice for school. But notice went out last Saturday. I'm failing on what the date was, the 11th or something like that. Not 11th, 15th. 15th. Notice went out on the 15th of the board's intent to appoint a replacement for Paul's seat. I wanted to put it out there that the appointment is through the next regular school election, so it would be up in November of 2021. So about 15 months, 14, 15 months is what the appointment would be. And the intent is to have an application process. I think board members have received an example of previous applications that we have used. I would kind of ask if anybody had thoughts on things that they would like to see added to that or removed from that, or if it's fine the way it is, and kind of how we would want to work through that process. I mentioned the notice date of the 15th. So the way it works is there's a 14-day period from the notice to for the public to file to have a special election. So that would be the 29th. So that's out there. I think there's good reasons as to why we would appoint at this time and not try and host the special election. And I would just kind of go back to our last agenda item, and one of the first things to talk about was a statement on what our board should look like. I think if we are going to say we want to have some say in what a board looks like, that's one way to do it. That's my personal opinion. That's not a board statement, but I'll throw that out there. Does anybody have anything to add to that process, or any questions on how the process will work?
Yeah, Sean, can you remind me how much a special election, what our estimate is of how much that would cost?
The number was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 20,000, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
You are wrong.
60.
It's like 70.
It's actually about, it's actually about 60. That's one of the things that Matt had me do, was call over the county, and they ran through some of that with me. So it's somewhere just north of 60 is what they projected.
And that would be the district's share. We would bear that whole cost, correct?
Yes. When I talked to the county, they said that it wasn't really possible to add it to one of the currently scheduled elections for the fall, the November election as an example. And so we would have to do a separate special election, and they were told that the cost would be about $60,000.
Sean, this might not be quite the right time to bring this up, but in terms of things on the application form itself, I would just like to ask, do we have to ask the question about whether or not the applicant plans to run for in the next election for that seat or not? Is that an optional thing on the form?
We don't have to. I mean, it's not a rule. Paul wants to jump in there.
Yeah. The reason that it's on there, Charlie, is because the previous boards have used that as a way to kind of, I guess, test. I mean, it's the applicant can say no and still run, but they didn't want to give someone an unfair advantage heading into an election, having already held the seat for a year to then get reelected. So that's usually why it's on there. They're just asking if you plan on running again.
Okay, that answers my specific question. Maybe we can have a chance to talk about having that, wanting to make that as a requirement for appointment or not at a later time. Yeah, Sean.
Right. I think if we have it on there, right, that becomes part of the discussion later. You know, as we look through applicants, decide on somebody, we can use that information however we as a board see fit, you know, either way. So I'm sort of, if it's there, it's extra information, but it doesn't dictate a yay or nay on a person, depending on how they answer that either.
I agree, Sean, although it might signal to people that the board has a certain intent, and that might change the applicant pool. Not saying right or wrong way or another, but it might affect who decides to apply.
So I guess we're trying to get that application up relatively soon so we can get through the process quickly. So we're hopefully not without our full complement of 7 for too long, if at all. So does the rest of the board have any particular inclination on leaving that one question in or removing it?
I'm okay leaving it in. And what date are we trying to get the posting up for the application?
Well, I think we can put it up whenever, because we've put our notice up of our plan to appoint via an application process. So once we have it put together, we can put it up, and maybe, you know, as early as, you know, the end of this week. That would be the other piece I would throw that out to you, is how long we want to keep it open, kind of work back from when we would want to, you know, make the decision and have the conversation as we go through applicants. That would then kind of dictate when we would need to close the process. So the earlier we can do it, the longer it can potentially be open. But
when we discuss those applications, how does that happen? Is that a public meeting?
I believe it has to be pretty public. And Kim reminded me the other day that as soon as we get the application, it's a public record, so people can see them.
I mean, our discussions of them.
And then the discussions end up at a public board meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll say all nice things about everybody.
Sure.
If you don't have something nice to say. Have any feedback on that particular question? Whether you run again?
I don't have a problem leaving that in.
If it were up to me, I would probably not have it. But if the majority of you are okay with it, I'm not going to object to it. So.
I'm okay with it. I mean, because we're not, some board members may look at that as a positive that the person is putting on in work, and some may object. If we're saying up front now that that's not a disqualifier, I'm fine with it.
I agree with that exactly, Ruthina. I don't believe it's a disqualifier either. So I'm okay if someone wants to answer that, but to me, that's not a disqualifier.
Okay. I can go along with that.
All right, my inclination is roughly a 2-week time frame to have the applications open. Does that seem sufficient? I know it seems short, but we're doing everything kind of on a rush basis these days, it seems like. Does 2 weeks seem like a sufficient time from whenever we get it up and available to get them in?
I'm fine with 2 weeks. I mean, because when you say get that up and available, I'm assuming not only will it go on our website, but also on any social media channels that we have, so that way we reach as broad of audience as possible, correct?
Let's say yes. I would throw that to Kim and Matt and Kristen, I suppose, how we would get that out there. I think you're right that we'd want to get it as, out there as much as possible.
Yeah, Kim or Kristen, you can add in here. We kind of talked through this the other day. We would broadcast it across and make sure the notice is provided across the board there. So Kristen, I don't know if you want to add exactly I know I won't get the whole list correct about all the places it would hit, but we definitely would do that.
Yeah, we could hit all our social media channels, our website, our mobile app, all of the traditional communication channels that we can use for sure.
I wouldn't. I guess I personally would prefer maybe a little bit longer time frame, or a little bit longer time for people to consider and do the background invest. That they're going to have to do to decide if they want to be a board member. To maybe 3 weeks or so. To me, 2 weeks is that'd be hard for me to make a decision within a couple of weeks if I was coming at this pretty much afresh. And I don't quite, I don't see personally much of a downside to the district for taking a bit longer to get the applications and review them before making an appointment. So.
What time frame would you be comfortable with, Charlie?
I was thinking of 3 weeks or so for an application period.
Anybody have a problem with adding one extra week?
I think it's fair. There's so much going on, and I agree. It's a big decision for the time period. We're talking through November 2021, right? I mean, it's a chunk of time and a time commitment. And folks, I think, do need to think it through. Probably ask some questions around what that means, and there's so many other things going on right now too. I'd support a 3-week time frame.
So Sean, not to throw a wrench into that, and I don't have the statute in front of me, but I do have the IASB guidance pulled up. And it says in order to make an appointment, the board has to make the appointment within 30 days of the vacancy. And so as you look at that time frame, if you extend it to 3 weeks, depending on when it is, the board might not, well, we're meeting every week now, so you would. But if you were looking at your normal board meeting schedule, you might not have an additional board meeting to do that within 30 days. So that'd be the only piece of caution, is just that we only have 30 days to fill it if it's by appointment.
In the past, Chase, there's has been a special meeting to do that didn't fall on a Tuesday board meeting night, just so that's what they've done in the past. And my resignation doesn't take effect until after the meeting on the 25th, so it's 30 days from the 26th.
Right, correct. From the day it's 30 days from the date of the resignation, correct.
So we posted on the 21st, and give ourselves to the 11th of September to receive applications. Then that gives us either the 15th or the 22nd to come back and review and approve who we want to appoint. I mean, I think that fits within that 30-day time frame and still gives us a 3-week window to collect applications, but that just means we've got to get it out there by this Friday or very soon, Sean, to your point.
Yeah, I think you're right. If we get it out there on Friday with 3 weeks, we could have at the special meeting, right? It would be a special meeting on the 15th to discuss it all and maybe make a decision, and then install them on the 22nd meeting at a regular board meeting. Like, it's kind of a compressed schedule, but I think it works. All right. So I'll work with Kim and Matt and Kristen to make sure we have the application that looks right. I know obviously the one that we got had different dates and different information on it, so we got to clean it up a little bit before we get out there. And I'll let you all know that, at least all you folks on the call, when it happens, and we'll try and get it out there to everybody. Any other comments on this topic?
I just want to apologize for making a proposal when I really didn't know the rules.
All right, Charlie, we got you. I think we got it sorted out.
I just want to add, maybe if we could add something at the end, like, is there anything else that you want to share with us? Just kind of like an open-ended question that gives candidates an opportunity to tell us something else. Because right now we're really looking at 250 words from them about what they would add to the board. And so just one more opportunity for somebody to speak to us in writing might help us in our decision-making process.
They also have time at the beginning of that meeting to make any comments that they want, generally, if they want to, in a community comment type section of a board meeting.
I'm okay with that, Lisa, and the rest of you. If it seems like a pretty good idea to invite a little bit more general information from the folks.
Yeah, it might be nice to know a little bit more ahead of time as we deliberate or, do our own kind of thinking on it.
Yeah, we can. I mean, the whole thing is kind of open-ended, right? And people can throw whatever they want in there, but I think the prompts would help. So yeah, we'll take a quick look at that, and I'll try and make sure I take a look at that and get back to, Kim and Matt here in the next day or so. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our action items. And I know the first item is going to need a little bit of explanation, a little walkthrough from Matt. So I think before I know you guys wanted to kind of explain where we're at here.
Sure. So thanks, Sean. So this item, as you can tell, they're listed as considering the district's participation in probable Iowa State Education Association litigation regarding limits on online education. And so the State Teachers Association, ISEA, is bringing forward litigation to challenge Governor Reynolds and Director Lebo's interpretation of Senate File 2310 about the 50% in-person instruction requirement. And Iowa City has been invited, or the Iowa City Community School District has been invited to be a petitioner on that complaint. And so that's for the board's consideration to join into this evening. And so you guys would have received that earlier today. I know it came late in the day, but you've had that, and I don't know how much conversation we want to have around it, but I think it's really up to us about deciding if that is a lawsuit we'd like to join into and to challenge that interpretation. Obviously, that 50% threshold has been problematic for us, as we've talked about in some of our meetings here, and that we'll have a little bit more commentary on as we approach the return to learn conversation. But we did split out these two different items tonight, one about the pursuit of some legal action, which has put our district in a difficult position, I think is why we're pursuing this, obviously, after we made the decision on the 14th of July to start in an offsite environment. And then knowing that even our hybrid plan that we had worked to design over the previous two months did not meet that new guidance that came out late in the summer. And so I think that's a basic summation. While we're here, if you guys are open to it, if Brady has any comments, he may want to add them in here. He may want to wait till the return to learn item, but I'll let him speak to that if he wants to say anything to this effect right now.
Yep. Thanks, Matt. This is Brady. I appreciate the opportunity to talk on this one. So just to back up, when we were together at the August 4th board work session, which was the last time we were all here on Zoom together, we didn't know whether the Department of Ed would accept or reject our return to learn permission ask. And during that work session, on behalf of the Iowa City Education Association, I expressed the hope that in the event the Department of Ed denied our request, that we would quickly reconvene, continue our collaboration, and examine our best next steps to advocate for our shared belief that local authorities must retain the ability to make and implement decisions that are best for their local communities during the COVID-19 pandemic. And on August 6th, the Department of Ed denied our request. I am proud to be able to say to the public, and we do have a lot of folks who are here attending, which I appreciate the high level of interest and engagement. I'm proud to say to the public, we did reconvene, we collaborated, and we examined next steps that protect our district, our staff, and our students, that adjust to the frustrating and constantly changing late in the game mandates from the state, and that also continue our collective advocacy for local control in the midst of the pandemic. So tonight, on behalf of the Iowa City Education Association, I am hopeful that the Iowa City Schools and its board of directors will extend its hand, virtually of course, in partnership to my amazing state organization, the Iowa State Education Association, by agreeing to be a co-petitioner in a lawsuit seeking a declaratory judgment and injunctive relief from the state of Iowa's actions regarding the return to learn decisions that have been made at the local level, including by us here in the Iowa City Community School District. I would have to say the board has been an amazing partner throughout this, as have our administrative teams. And as I've worked with our state leaders across, Iowa, it's clear that we are, we are the leaders, I think, in terms of prioritizing health and safety. And I know that we're deeply appreciative of all the actions that have been taken, because they haven't been easy decisions. You've poured in hours and hours into them. So we're hopeful that you will join ISEA in the litigation. We see that as a logical and appropriate next step that follows the process that we have available. Thanks.
Thanks, Brady. Matt, you can stop me if I'm kind of putting the cart before the horse, but I think that the concern that I have had since the various piecemeal guidance has come out is that it doesn't take into consideration our local conditions, right? It lumps every district across the state into one bucket. It's a one size fits all kind of plan. And that's really at the heart of what this litigation would be, is to have local control over some of those decisions. I want to be clear that it's not saying we're suing so we can start completely offline, or we're suing to have this put in place or that put in place. It's looking at how we best can make decisions locally and have that authority. So one of the things that I think is very important, and I know, Matt, we have discussed this, and I would throw it out there to the board because I think it's something that I believe the board needs to direct our admin team to do, is to create what we feel locally are going to be good metrics to either move completely back into school or completely away from school or into the hybrid and back and forth, and be very clear what those numbers should look like. And I think another big thing is, which numbers are we looking at? Whose numbers are we looking at? Because as we've all seen in the news, that the numbers can be deceiving depending on where you're looking. So I think that piece in and of itself, as a direction to the admin team to create the metrics based on what we think works locally for the size of our district and the number of buildings we have and the staff and students that we have. And then what this litigation would do is allow us to actually follow that plan without, having punitive damages levied upon us from the state level. So that's the piece that I think has to go hand in hand with this discussion. And with that, I'm going to open it up to other board members to weigh in on all of it, ask questions, whatever you need to.
I'll jump in, Sean and Matt and Brady. Thanks for your comments. I support joining ISEA in this lawsuit. And I wish I'd had taken the time to prepare written comments to express my sentiments on this, but I will give it a go. I know for a fact that this district has followed every sort of level piece of guidance that came from the state and the DOE throughout this entire process, that we operated in very, very good faith as we put together very, very detailed return to learn plans and that this school board took our duty extraordinarily seriously when we did vote in July to start online. We looked at our local conditions, we looked at our local infection rates, we looked at the population of students who were coming back to the University of Iowa as we speak. We listened to our community members and stakeholders. We listened to our teachers, we listened to staff, and we took our job very seriously, and we voted as a board to start school online. A few days later, we had very different guidance coming from the state, which did not feel like it was offered in good faith, I'll just say. It felt like it was taking our local authority away. And the manner in which it was proposed to enforce those new directives, I think, Sean, you used the word punitive. I would use that word, and I would even say retaliatory. Those tactics, to me, in light of the late guidance, but then the punitive retaliatory nature of saying we want to punish administrators for defying this guidance, that we were breaking the law, that we would penalize students who were having online instruction or less than 50% in-person instruction, so they didn't receive credit. I mean, these are strong-arm tactics to try to get us to comply with a one-size-fits-all solution that was delivered, I think, in not good faith, not in timely direction, not listening to the council and the local community inputs that we took so seriously. And so I feel like we need to support this initiative and partner with ISEA and support our community for this matter, but also from a precedence perspective that we need to retain local control, because we've been elected to listen to our community members to make those decisions. And our community is different from many other communities within the state. And that's why we have local school boards, to be able to make those kinds of decisions. And so I feel strongly about local control. I feel very strongly about the way in which this process unfolded. We operated in extraordinarily good faith. I don't feel that reciprocation from our state level leaders. And I want to go forward with this and support the opportunity to provide local control in the local school districts.
Yeah, I'll kind of share my thoughts. I appreciate that, Janet. That was my sentiment as well, that this wasn't in good faith. And certainly with the metrics the governor uses, don't seem to be designed to truly keep our staff and students safe from COVID-19. But more importantly, you know, I think Senate File 2310 is not clear, and I believe that the governor is interpreting that law, and it's really up to the courts to interpret the law and tell her what it means so that she can enforce what the legislature intended. And so in addition to what's already been stated, I too support joining ISEA in this legislation, or in this lawsuit.
I'll chime in next. And like Janet, I wish I probably should have written something out, but I didn't, so I'll wing it. I too support joining this litigation. And you know, I am a fourth generation Iowan, and I'm so proud of our state. And we have such a rich tradition of local control and home rule that is really unique. And to see that tradition kind of cast aside and discarded because of one person's interpretation of what a statute means is really disheartening. That's not what we do in Iowa. And when we're faced with something like this, the appropriate way is to kind of turn to our judicial branch, like JP said, and ask the courts to intervene. I think that this lawsuit and the expression of our frustration in asking the judicial branch to help us understand what this law actually means is exactly the way that our democratic process is supposed to work out. I would also join in what Sean mentioned. If we are successful and if we prevail in this lawsuit, then I think we need to be ready to go with our own set of metrics that are data driven, that are reached in connection with our local public health department and experts in the field. We need to be ready to implement those metrics in making decisions on how we return back to school. And so not only would I vote that we join in the litigation, but I would also vote to direct Interim Superintendent Degner to start preparing the metrics that if we are granted the right of local control, we will implement and put into action.
I know I've had my say, Sean. Can I say one more thing? Real fast. This action decision that we're going to vote on is also not taken lightly. This is, I think, I don't want anyone to think that this, at least in my standpoint, is a frivolous move, that it's easily made move. This is also, like our vote in July, a lot of consideration and thought has gone into this. This is not taken lightly. I think, I really appreciate Lisa's comments around, the process here for interpreting these statutes, that this is our democratic process in play. But again, I guess I really wish we didn't have to be in this situation. I think there was a better way to manage this, and a more effective way of managing this. And so this is not a decision being taken lightly, but I do support it wholeheartedly. There is a question that maybe we can respond to regarding the costs for this process. And my understanding is that there won't be a significant cost impact to the district should we vote to proceed with this. And I wonder if, Matt, you can comment on that.
That's what legal counsel had advised us, that most of that cost would be borne by the State Education Association as the lead on this case. So I don't think it's a substantial financial cost to the district.
Yep, Matt, this is Brady. That's my understanding as well in working with the state associate with ISEA, that it will be primarily, borne by the state association.
If you don't mind, Sean, I would just like to say that one, I'm very happy and determined to support the district joining the ISEA's litigation. And I'm very pleased to hear Brady's and our local EA statement and comment. I've tried to keep in my mind as we consider what we can do as a district to enhance the safety of students and staff. We keep coming back to, we need to have, in order to have a safe district so the students can come to for in-classroom work, we need to have low transmission rates or infection rates in the county generally. And we need to have a mitigation plan that relies upon those infection rates being low in order to have a chance of ensuring or trying to assure the safety of kids in the district and staff in the district. We need to have good testing methodology and quantity that enables us to keep within school building infection rates as low as we possibly can. We don't have those two things. We don't have a low recommended county rate, and we don't have the testing capabilities that we need to have. So it's confusing to me why the state government is taking the position that they're taking. And it's so confusing that I've actually kind of given up on trying to understand it or react to it. My job is to look after, as best I can, students and staff in this district, and that's what I want to do. So I'm happy. I mean, again, I'm happy to join the ICEA and ISEA in this litigation.
So apologies, I should clear my comments up a little bit and agree with Brady there. I was a little bit unclear. There would not be a substantial financial cost board of the district, but we would obviously incur costs that our own legal counsel, Joe Holland, would spend on time with this. But the brunt of the work and the brunt of the cost is going to be borne by the State Education Association. But it's not that it's cost free to the district, but it's not substantial cost. We're not leading this effort on our own or creating this suit on our own in that fashion. And so if any time there's a threshold number or something that way that the board feels like we would need to check in on about the amount of cost it's taking, we could certainly do that. But at this time, we know that ISEA is leading that and bearing the brunt of those costs and responsibility.
Paul, did you have something?
Go ahead.
Okay. I agree with joining in with the litigation. I think the most important piece that mostly everyone has said is the fight to retain local control. That's what we are at risk of losing if we do not join in this litigation. So my support is 100% behind this lawsuit being filed by ISEA. And I don't know if Paul does have anything to add. If so, go ahead and you're done.
Just a couple questions. So I guess, Matt, a couple things. We did get this late, the petition late, so I didn't honestly get to read through all of it. I tried to read as much as I could in the time that I had, but what can you just tell me again what the rush is to have it? We have to have this in now, and then are there any other districts that are looking at this to join in as well, or are we the only ones right now that are doing that?
I believe we are the only district that's been invited to do that. From our conversation, or the legal counsel's conversation back to me, was that Iowa City Community School District was the district that's been invited to join into this. And the rush to have a vote for the board, or the vote for the board tonight, would be because of the filing deadline. I do believe they would like to file this here in the next day or two. And so that's why it's on your agenda here for review this evening.
And then, like some of the other directors mentioned, I mean, we've had this discussion a little bit before, but part of my hesitation was just that we don't have those metrics. Like, I don't know what we're asking. I know we want control, and I'm not opposed to the local control part of it. I just don't know what our metrics are for when we want to go 100% online and when we want to return in person and that type of thing. So while we have to fight to get the local control part of it, I still want to be able to know what we're asking for. So that part's just a little bit frustrating because we're kind of asking for something that we don't have yet. But I will support it. I just have hesitations, like I think we've talked about in the past. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I guess maybe could somebody just speak to temporary injunctive relief and kind of how that might work as far as in the short and near term, if we do go forward with this?
So that would grant flexibility for us to interpret the part in question, JP. And so it would not penalize us for doing something out of compliance with the guidance at that point. So that would be the need for the temporary injunctive relief. Then until it is settled and determined by the court about if that interpretation is correct or not, then the district would be allowed to operate with some greater flexibility in that regard. Of course, the timing for us is getting close to the start of the school year. We're going to have the conversation next about return to learn. But for this particular item, that's what the injunctive relief would look like, or would allow us to do in that sense.
And maybe just for the public, how quickly would a judge rule on something like temporary injunctive relief once this is filed?
I don't have a good estimate of that. That's a conversation we could take back to Joe and see if he could give an estimate. This one, because of the timing of the year, his initial reaction to that is it could get a quicker hearing than maybe other cases would because of the urgency with the start of the school year, but that's not necessarily guaranteed.
I'll throw in a last thought on my part, and then I'll throw it out there for either a motion or more comments. But I sort of look at this action item right now as our long-term answer to what's going on, right? Because we don't know what October brings, or November or December, and so on and so forth. And if we are handcuffed into following the metrics that were given to us, I think we could get into some pretty dicey situations that we're going to have to, in the moment, take very drastic actions. And so I think this really speaks to long-term ability to be adaptable. The next action item, when we get into our return to learn plan, and I think perhaps that's where we also throw in our local metrics discussion, is our much more short-term plan, or at least, what the start of the school year looks like. So I see them as two very important pieces that are going hand in hand. But I do believe this piece is much more about the entire upcoming school year and future years for that matter, not just what September 8th looks like. So that's why I think this is an important decision that we're making. And I would entertain a motion for it if anybody is inclined.
I move that the district joins as a plaintiff in litigation to be initiated by the Iowa State Education Association, challenging limits imposed by the governor's July 17th proclamation on school districts' use of remote learning, subject to final approval by district legal counsel of the petition and related pleadings to be filed.
Second.
Sorry, JP.
I will open it up for any further discussion before we take the actual vote. Any other comments from anyone? All right, Kim, it seems like we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, thank you for that. All right, and now we will move into our return to learn plan. I know that there's a lot here, so I'll kind of kick it over to you, Matt, and see how you want to go through it. And you can ask questions as we go, or keep it to the end, however you want to do it.
Sure. So thank you, President Eystone. I'd like to start with a few comments tonight. I think it's been a little while since we've kind of done a reset around some of these conversations. And obviously, as Sean started with some of the comments from the storm last week, I think it's just a good time for our community to reflect a little bit. But this situation we find ourselves in is difficult in many aspects. Everyone's working tirelessly to do the best we can to keep our staff and students safe and provide the best learning experience possible considering the circumstances in front of us. There's no other motive or agenda at play for us here in the district. No one has asked for this. No one wants to be in this situation, and no one is more eager to get our schools back to normal than our administrators, teachers, staff, parents, and students. Our staff understands the risks of not being in school and the risk of being in school. Our parents want their children to be safe and have a high quality learning experience and do not want to have to worry about childcare and the loss of income. People are rightfully scared, tired, frustrated, and uncertain about what is best. There are no good solutions here. We're working towards the least bad choice. No matter your feelings on whether or not what the district decides to do or has done, I hope we can continue to come together as a community and treat each other with grace and empathy as we work through this pandemic together. It's not over and will not be anytime soon. Locally, we have to work together through this challenge and find ways to do the best we can and hold each other up. This evening, you've just heard the district conversation on challenging the legality around interpretation of Senate File 2310 and the subsequent Department of Education guidance. This is an important question to have settled, not just for our district, but also all of Iowa. While that works through the appropriate process, we have a school year approaching us very quickly. On July 14th, the district administrative team made a recommendation supported by the Johnson County Department of Public Health that was approved by the board to start fully off-site for this upcoming school year. Since that time, we've received new directives and guidance from the state that has limited our ability to do that. We've met with the Department of Ed and explained our position and reasons. We've submitted the request for permission to begin off-site, but were subsequently denied the ability to do so. At this time, to stay in compliance with our current interpretation of state law, the administrative team is recommending we begin in our 50% AB hybrid model. As a district, we do not have the luxury to not have our hours and days in calendar count, as there will be long-term financial consequences to the district that we cannot afford, as well as consequences to our students and their ability to earn credits and achieve graduation from accredited institutions. On the positive side, we know more than we did on July 14th. We've tracked registrations coming in, and we've seen upwards of 40% of our students enroll into the district's PK-12 online learning model. This high percentage will allow for a few of our students to be in school on a daily basis and provide a better opportunity to mitigate risk in our school buildings. This will also allow us to work with more staff members to better position them safely for the upcoming school year. We know that coming to school will not be risk-free, just like going anywhere in our community right now is not risk-free, but we'll work hard to minimize that risk. We will have to stay diligent and consistent in our efforts and be prepared to change course when necessary. The plan and presentation we're sharing out with you tonight will be available to the community by the end of the week and will continue to be updated. Because of the length, we will not read or point out every piece tonight, but we would be happy to take the questions the board has at the end after we work through the information that we have here presented in the attachment to the board agenda. So with that, I'm going to ask Kristen to pull it up and we'll start working through our slides. So this one will look familiar to you. This has been our return to learn graphic and our commitment and our 4 focus areas as we've tried to continue to plan over the last several months. Health and safety, academic focus, equity, and flexibility and parent choice have been key factors in that decision making as we've tried to work towards the best solution for the school district and our students. The continuum of learning models, we've worked to update. We know that a few of those models we had on there are no longer viable. The original one, the PK4 or a PK6 model, we do not have current flexibility between the different levels that we have to meet that 50% threshold based on the current guidance. And so we really refined it to those 3 different models that you see now in the continuum with 100% offsite, or in our hybrid that we just recommended to you to start the year in, or our fully on-site model. And then at the bottom, you can see on our graphic there that we still have the choice for parents to opt into the PK-12 online learning program. And that choice we'll just probably say it as many times as we can tonight, that registration is still open for tomorrow until 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday evening, that parents could still opt their students into that program. I can't remember if this is where I was going to kick it over to Amy or not, but I think this was yours, wasn't it, Amy?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt. It's good to be with everyone tonight. So the next few slides, we have some touch points around what Matt just went over with the continuum there. So we're going to highlight the item that's across the bottom of the continuum, which is our PK-12 online learning program. And the language that we lifted for the slide tonight is from the website, and it just details by and large what our online learning program is like. If you visit our website, you're going to learn a lot more about our program. If you haven't gone out there, there are several pages associated with the online program. The bigger reason that we wanted to bring this up tonight is just to highlight where we've been recently, and even this afternoon. I know that Adam continues to track our data, so we've got some data to display here in the presentation, but while Kristen's displaying it, I'm actually going to share some data that is just a bit more up to date. So as of this evening, at almost 6 o'clock this evening, we have 78% of our families that have e-registered. And through that selection of either the choice of the standard enrollment, which for our families this year means that they would be having their children attend whichever model the district was in, whether that was hybrid, fully on-site, or that temporary move off-site, or option B, as we're calling it, the online learning program. And we are seeing, as of this evening, 53% of our families picking the standard option and 46% picking the online option. So what that equates to number-wise, if we're just speaking about the online program, we have around 1,400 of our high school students enrolled in the online program, 860 junior high students, and just over 3,000 elementary students. Yesterday we announced, and tonight the board approved, the director of PK-12 online learning program as Dr. Schultz. And also, although not formally announced, last night during the 2 webinars that we held, we did share that we have 3 elementary principals helping to support Dr. Schultz with this online program. Given that we're over 5,300 students now enrolled, we definitely knew that there needed to be support for Dr. Schultz in this work. And our 3 elementary principals will be retaining their positions at their buildings. But we have asked that Amber Dobbs, Wickham Elementary Principal, Eliza Proctor, Lemmy Elementary Principal, and Kelly Webb, Longfellow Elementary Principal, help support Dr. Schultz in this work. We'll go on to the hybrid slide now, Kristen. This is a slide that we've also shared out before. It just details what 50% face-to-face instruction looks like. And it details what an A group's 2-week schedule would look like, as well as our B group schedule. We have taken questions about what our offsite days would look like, and that's also detailed on this slide for both the elementary and secondary students. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chase for some health and safety protocols.
Great, thanks Amy. Good evening everyone. It's nice to be with you this evening and to share some of the information about what health and safety is going to look like in our buildings when we return this fall. A couple of opening comments on that. First, a big thank you to Kate Callahan, Dwayne Van Hemert, and all the members of our health and safety team as they've worked tirelessly, as all of our team has this summer as we put these plans back together, but really trying to navigate the new information coming out from the CDC, from the Johnson County Public Health, working with our partners at Johnson County Public Health and the university as we try to put some of these guidelines in place to really make sure we continue to focus on the health and safety of our students and our staff. As Matt mentioned, we know that it's not without risk to come to school, but we believe that we can put some things in place that will mitigate that. The other thing to mention as we look at these, you might look at them and say, wow, can they really do that? Well, as Amy just talked about with our online learning program and where the enrollment is, when we look at in combination, the number of students in our buildings is a lot less than what would be there on a normal school day. So for instance, if we have an elementary school of 450 students and a third of those have chose the online program, and then we have our A/B models, that means we have 150 in the online, 150 in the A group, and 150 in the B group. So an elementary school that would normally house 450 kids on a daily basis now has 150. That allows us to do a lot more to ensure social distancing and health and safety measures that we put in place as we look to protect our staff and our students. Matt also mentioned that there's a lot of information in these slides, and I'm not going to read it verbatim, but really going to go over and highlight the key areas. And as Matt said, this is a document that's still a work in progress, but we will have it available to the community by the end of the week. And some of this information shouldn't be new. We've shared this in our presentations over the summer, and so a lot of it is just reiterating what we've put out there. But we divided our mitigation strategies into 3 categories: district-wide, and then elementary building specific, and secondary building specific. I'm going to go quickly through the district-wide and then turn it over to Diane and Scott to help me with the elementary and secondary. And so on this slide, you see just 3 of our categories: transportation, our physical building structures, and then hand hygiene. One of the top things from the CDC is to wash hands. And so you'll see that a couple of different places: reminders, signage, ways to make sure that we're reminding our students to wash their hands and use hand sanitizer and have it available in our buildings. The next three categories are daily screenings for COVID-19, face coverings, and contact barriers. Face coverings is one of the first things we announced back in May or June, and it continues to be a focal point of our health and safety. And we will be providing face coverings to students and staff when we start the school year, and they will be required for anyone that is entering our buildings. You see there a sub-bullet under the daily health screenings to our chart that we have developed. We've talked about this as well, but it's at the end of the slide deck. And so we will cover that a little bit later this evening. The next areas, common spaces, meeting with members of the community, and shared materials. One of the pieces that health and safety focused on was the need to try to keep our students together as much as possible. And while we know that there is also a social part of being in school, given the pandemic and the circumstances we currently face, we have to make some tough decisions. And one of those is that we are going to close our common spaces in our buildings, at least to begin the year. And so our multi-purpose rooms, our cafeterias, our gyms, our libraries, unless they are specifically being used for an educational purpose or to feed students, we are not going to have them open for students to visit. And we understand that that's a challenge, and that's probably disheartening to our students that will be in the buildings. But again, we think it's one of those measures that we need to take to make sure that we do our best to keep our students healthy and safe. And then one of the other changes is, just like we're having our board meetings via Zoom, all professional development trainings until further notice will be conducted via Zoom or some sort of other internet-based platform. That also goes for the meetings that we have with families. A different mode of communication with our families, but one we think is important, but that also helps us balance that need to connect, but to do so in a safe and healthy way. And the last one on this is shared materials. The Health and Safety Committee has been very great at doing research about the need for us to limit those shared materials in our buildings. And so we're going to take steps to do just that. On this page, we see 5 more. Guidelines around student drop-off and pickup, how we're going to test the signage. I mentioned that. And it's not enough just to put one sign in a building, but to have a campaign about the importance of wearing a mask, the importance of washing your hands, the importance of social distancing, and doing that in a positive way. These should be seen as things that we can all do together to protect each other's health as we're all learning together. Health office procedures, that's been something that the board has asked us about a number of times. And later again in today's document, we're going to be able to go through those in detail and put those out to our community so they know what to expect when a child is sent to the health room while they're at the office. And then another strategy about locker use and limiting that as one additional way to help maintain social distancing inside our schools. And this slide really speaks to our connection with the community. And as a district, we're very thankful for the support we get from our community. And we understand that without the community and the way the community interacts and gives to the school district, we wouldn't be as successful as we are. And so this one's very difficult for us. But we understand that in order to be and continue to be a strong community partner and an example for the rest of our community, we have to make some tough choices when it comes to community involvement this fall. And so we've made that difficult decision that we will not allow visitors and volunteers in our buildings as we begin school. And we've eliminated field trips, and we're also going to limit the number of spectators that can watch official district events, athletics, and other student performances. Again, it's not ideal. It's sad for us as a community. That's sad for our students. But we think when we balance that against the needs for health and safety, that these are the difficult decisions that we have to make. Along with building use, our buildings can be places of community gathering. But right now, that's not really what's best for our community in terms of health and safety. And so as we begin the year, we will close our buildings to any community use and will only allow sanctioned district events to be held in those facilities. Lastly, before I turn it over to Diane, is our before and after school programs. This summer, we reached out to all of our programs. We recognize that with this pandemic, there's also a need for childcare. And so we worked with our programs this summer to run BASP in several of our buildings to offer limited programs. We saw those that running with the additional restrictions and health and safety measures in place to be successful. And so we are going to continue to offer a limited BASP service throughout the school year. It won't look the same as it has in the past, but we want to, again, provide this needed service to our families and to those in the community, but also balance the need to protect the health and safety of not only the students and staff in that program, but the health and safety of all the students and staff in that entire school building. And so we're trying to strike that that balance and meet both of those needs. Again, that was quick, but we wanted to put this out in front of the community this evening. After Diane and Scott go, we'll pause and answer some questions. But please remember that we will be providing this not only on our website, but out to everyone in the community before the end of the week. Diane, you want to talk a little bit about specific techniques at the elementary level?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. We're going to start at the elementary like we start the day with our arrival and breakfast time. Some of that time is due to the fact that our teachers aren't starting their day until 7:40. So if our buses are arriving a little bit before then, we're going to have the students go to breakfast in the cafeteria. But students who can arrive at 7:40 or later can actually take their breakfast into their classroom. So we're really thinking carefully about how we get kids to their classroom as quickly as possible and not have them interacting with other kids in other classrooms. We want to keep the kids, as they say here, in their classroom cohorts all throughout the day. So students will not be trading classrooms with other teachers in their building. They will stay in their classroom for the most part of the day. Where we can and where we can keep it safe, we're going to bring teachers who support the students into the classroom. But there may be some opportunities, for instance, in art, music, or PE, where students are going to be more active and need more room. And then we will have them go into those classrooms for art, music, and PE. However, we're going to shorten those specials periods just by a few minutes so that we can do some cleaning in between groups of students who are using those classrooms. Library, as one of our common spaces, will not be open to students. So that will be closed, and the librarians will be coming into the student classrooms to do their library lessons and to offer checkout for students within their classrooms. As we're thinking about other things that go on in the classroom, small group instruction, we're going to be very careful about that, trying to keep the kids in their desk as much as possible when they're in the classroom. And if we have to pull the kids back for small group, we're going to think about how we can do that without having them touch tables or having them share any materials during that process. Lunch will be interesting. We know that we need to keep our kindergarten and first graders in the lunchroom. We talked about having them eat in the classroom, but none of us can quite imagine how a kindergartner is going to get that tray of food all the way from the lunchroom down to their classroom with the food still being on the tray by the time they get there. So we're going to have for sure the kindergarten and first grade students eat in the cafeteria with social distancing measures in place. And then second through sixth grade students, we think that they can eat in the classroom. However, as Chase mentioned before, with the numbers of our students being fairly small in our elementaries, as long as we can social distance in the cafeteria, we think we can allow them to eat in the cafeteria. The menu items will be served to students individually packaged with disposable silverware. And obviously everything will be cleaned and sanitized between groups. Recess, we want the kids to be able to enjoy recess, but again, we do not want them commingling with other classes. So when the students go out to recess, we're going to have designated areas, either marked by white paint or maybe by traffic cones. So the students will stay in those certain areas while they're out at recess so that we aren't having any students interact with students from other classes. And then in the hallways as well, we're going to try to make sure that as much as we can, we'll have one-way traffic wherever that's possible. We'll be marking signs in the hallways. We'll be having spaces marked out so students can social distance and stay that 6 feet apart. Dismissal, we're still working on those procedures. We haven't quite figured out yet if it's best to dismiss students by bus or by classroom, but we sure want to make sure that we are staggering anytime students are in the hallway. All right, I will pass that along to Scott for secondary mitigation techniques.
All right, good evening, everybody. similar to Diane, the format is broke down the same. And so the arrival time, junior high's always been using 8:35 and the high schools are still working out when that best time is. Teaching staff arrive at 8:15. Students at the high school level have had a lot of freedom traditionally, and due to our circumstances, there's going to be significantly more restrictions on their movement, and you'll see that in these documents. So when we look at lunch, maybe the bottom bullet is where I should start for our high school students, that campus is closed. Students are used to being able to get in their car with their friends and drive off somewhere and get lunch and then make it back on time, and that won't be the case. In our cafeterias, I want to remind everybody that if 40% of our students are off line, that means 60% are in our building, and that means 30% on A days and 30% on B days. And in all our buildings, junior high and high school, we're going to 3 lunches. So that means we're serving just 10% of our students at any lunch at any time. And so we're going to space out the tables. We're going to sit at 50% of the capacity at those tables and use those large spaces as well as we can. And then Allison and her team did a fabulous job last spring in terms of cleaning those service areas. I'll continue to use the touchless payment pieces, those items that Allison's teams already had implemented last year. Intervention block has been a time, whether it's called Liberty Time or AFT or Little Hawk Time, that's been a time where we've gone to a classroom and then we've scattered, frankly. So, hey, I need help in biology, and off I go to the biology teacher, and then other kids will come to that particular teacher. We've determined that it's impossible for us to contact trace in that environment. And so we still will have a homeroom, and each school can call that whatever they'd like. And for the most part, we'll be using that for social emotional learning, our PBIS, our MVP lessons, and those kind of items. But we won't be scattering during intervention block. The last bullet in that, well, actually the middle 2 bullets are also of interest to our high school students in particular, again, because they've been so used to their freedom. Students with open periods in the middle of the day will be assigned to study hall or another area. So in the past, they may have gone to the courtyard, or they may have gone to the library, or sat in the cafeteria, and that's just not the case. We're not going to be able to contact trace if you have that level of freedom. And so we feel bad about that. We hope we get out of that environment, but that's necessary at this time. The hallway piece, I don't think we're going to create like this hall is only one way in this direction, but we're going to create like the right side is one way down the hallway and then the right side the other direction coming back. So just really be explicit about making sure our traffic flow. And again, we're talking 1/3 of the kids or less in our building at any one time. We too are working through the dismissal procedures, but we will ask families to have their students ready to go right after school. And if they're not able to leave right away, then we're going to need to have them in a particular location so that we're just, again, we're not able to contact trace if students are roaming after school.
Great. Thank you, Scott and Diane. And so along with some of the health and safety mitigation strategies, there is several items of PPE and other materials that the district is going to provide. Those are listed there. We've talked about those previously, and we'll make this information also available to the public. It's clear from that list of mitigation strategies that there are a tremendous number of interests that we're trying to balance. And while in the development of our online programming and our hybrid models, we truly want to focus on providing students the best education possible, we also understand that protecting their health and safety is equally important, and not just that of our students, but of our teachers who are asking to come in, and our other staff that are asking to come in on a daily basis to help provide that educational experience. And so again, I just want to pause and thank the teams that have worked so diligently to put these materials together. But as the board has somewhat discussed earlier this evening, some of this is also a bit fluid, and we've made adjustments to these protocols as we've gotten new guidance, whether it be from the DE or the CDC, and we will continue to do that. We want to make sure that we're staying up to date on what the recommendations are and that we incorporate them into our plans as we move forward. A couple other pieces that we'd like to go through, and I referenced these earlier before we open it up to the board for questions, but I mentioned our daily health screener. This is a document that we've worked on and we've developed, and there's been several iterations and some that have been shared over the course of the last several months. But you might remember that we settled on that the recommendations and the current guidance from state and federal officials with regard to education is that the evaluations for symptoms be done at home before people come to school. And so this is an important document for our families, and one we want to make sure that they see, because it gives them those guidance for when they should stay at home, and if they answer yes to the symptoms, what their next steps are. And we'll definitely reiterate this with our families, because that's an important piece, is that if students or staff feel sick, they don't come to school. Also included in our guidance is, we're in a pandemic, and no matter how many of these mitigation strategies we put in place, unfortunately, there are probably going to be cases of COVID-19 in our schools. And it's unfortunate, but we need to be prepared. And so we've also developed guidelines, and we leaned heavily on guidance that had come out from the DE. Janet made some comments that I appreciated about the team's diligence in respecting the guidance that came from the DE and incorporating it into our plans. And this is another example of that. The DE gave us guidance about what we should look for and how it would look for students in our schools. And so we've tried to capture that, along with also balancing that with guidance we've gotten from some of our local health experts from Johnson County and the university. And so this part of the document goes through kind of some definitions and guidelines about what a positive test means, what a negative test means, and what being in close contact means. And then the second half of this piece moves into, well, what happens? And the current guidance is that you use the close contact definition of individuals that are within 6 feet of a positive case for more than 15 minutes. Those folks would need to go home for the quarantine period. And that's for individual students. And then we've also articulated our guidance that we used for extracurricular activities and co-curricular activities. The information you see there is what we used for baseball and softball this summer. We thought it worked well. We worked on it with our coaches, with our athletic directors, and so we will use that again this fall for co-curricular and extracurricular activities. The rest of this page is blank. However, this goes to the conversation that the board was having just before that about what are those metrics that the district's going to look at in terms of when we would move an entire school or the district into the online learning model. And so once we have those developed, we'll bring those back and we'll put them in this document so that the community has access to know what those specifics are. We didn't want to presume or get ahead of the board on this evening's conversation. So we just left that blank for the time being. One of the questions we've often got is, what happens if my child is sick at school? And that's an important piece, right? If you're going to send your most precious assets to the buildings half of the week, you want to know what happens if they get sick at school. And so our nurses, who we heard from in community comment, and they are doing tremendous work, and we thank them for everything they're doing to help keep our students and our staff safe. They helped us develop this, and it really runs through what are those protocols that we'll use when students start showing signs of COVID at the school building. And it also tells families what has to happen after you're ill and before you return to school. One of the things that the board's talked to us a lot about is, what are we doing with contract tracing? Again, we have to give a nod to our colleagues at the Johnson County Public Health. They've worked on this piece with us, and we will continue to collaborate with them in our tracing efforts. And there is a link if anyone at home wants to click on that gives some additional information. A couple of more diagrams. I might have referenced these earlier, and if I didn't, I apologize, but it's a different way to capture the information that we're showing. I mentioned in that last page that it talks about how and when a student or a staff member would return to school after being in close contact or testing positive for COVID-19. This provides a flow chart that allows families or staff members to work through that when making that decision. And then also our contact tracing protocol related to COVID-19 and the steps that we will follow. A lot of information in what we're presenting tonight, and there are a number of details that we know our families want and deserve. And so we were working to get these to them, and I know that we did not go over them in great detail, but do want to reassure everyone that not only is this presentation currently available through board docs, we will be finalizing a more formalized version of this that we will distribute to families before the end of the week. And I say finalizing because we know there's some outstanding questions. And this is one right here around athletics, co-curriculars, clubs, and extracurricular activities. As of today, we're going to continue to operate these activities for our students. We understand that these are an important part of the school process, but we also know that we need some health and safety measures in place for our students and staff that are participating in these events. And so we will continue to build that out, but did want the community and of course the board to be aware that we are making plans to develop some guidelines around that. And of course, resources that are also available to provide additional guidance. Matt, I'll turn that back over to you.
Thanks. I might ask Scott to go ahead and share some additional information about music that we know at this time. So I think the athletics and activities, specifically around athletics, we still need some time this week to finalize some details. And so we'll share back with you next week what that'll look like and how that'll fully be encompassed. But I do think we have some information around some of our music opportunities that we could share out this evening. So Scott, are you okay jumping in here?
I am. Thank you, Matt. So one of the first things when I started in my new role was meeting with the performing arts staff. They've been awesome partners in this work. I want to thank John Welch as well, who's the curriculum director for secondary performing arts folks. We've been getting guidance from the National Federation of High Schools, who partnered with the University of Colorado to conduct aerosol studies in the performing arts. And I won't read all those details to you, but I do want to hit some highlights. And those folks have determined that social distancing matters even in the performing arts. So 6 feet away, absolutely. But they also say that masks work for the instruments, masks works for the choir participants as well. And so you'll be hearing that in this part of it from me a lot. So the other thing, maybe before I move on to some other pieces here, is we know that the music programs are curricular in nature, where athletics are extracurricular. And so, yeah, there are some co-curricular parts of that where it extends before school or after school, but really our focus has been on the curricular side of things. And so our directors feel strongly, and the guidance again from the aerosol study was that our ensembles should be much smaller. So they've been around this notion of let's have some chamber ensembles as opposed to large performance groups. And so you'll hear that as well as we go through here. We really are breaking down the size of our ensembles throughout the day as opposed to having just one band of 175 kids during first period. So again, as we mentioned, we are purchasing those masks. Dwayne's team is doing that. And again, sort of masks for the instruments. They're a nylon covering that West Music is helping us with. And that process has begun. The Iowa High School Music Association has canceled the state marching band contest. And we as a team have decided that we won't be running marching band this fall. So we won't have marching band at a football game. We won't have it at the Iowa homecoming parade, which we now know is no longer anyway, or our own homecoming parades. We won't be doing marching band. That said, the band directors want the kids to have a band experience, right? And so if we can find some opportunities for small ensembles to perform, we will do so, because we know that performing is what kids like to do. Looking at my other notes here, let me slide down. Concerts. I can picture our concerts. I went to a lot of them, and we jam a lot of folks into those auditoriums, and we just know that we're not going to be able to socially distance in those auditoriums. And so for the fall trimester, and we'll evaluate as we get to the winter trimester, there won't be any fall concerts, not for band, not for orchestra, not for choir, not for our elementary or junior high programs. The directors are working on how they give parents the performance experience. And we know that that's an evaluation piece for our directors as well, as how they perform at those concerts. So for the fall, no concerts. And if I didn't mention elementary, I should have. I know John has been worried about our beginning band students, and we know that that's the lifeblood of our programs. And so our elementary band directors are working on how they do that in a virtual environment. And so small groups, again, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids and small lessons, even if you choose the virtual option. I'm a show choir dad. Show choir has been coming up a lot, and that is extracurricular as opposed to curricular in nature. But numerous show choir competitions are already canceled. And as Sean knows, and I know as a parent, there's a lot of investment in time and money on the front end that usually begins in the summer. And at this time, we're not going to put out competitive show choirs for this school year. We do, again, want to provide experiences for kids. And so we're going to try to create a show choir experience. We'll try to do that for the kids and for the families. If we're able to gather in December or January to do that, we will. But at this point, we just don't think that's a wise use of our resources or our time to do competitive show choir. And the final piece is just kind of rolling it back to the curricular piece. When I did my webinar last night, it was really important to our directors that even if you choose the online option, that we stay connected to our building directors. Folks see them as city high band kids, right? And we're not gonna, where we might do American studies collectively across the system, we're gonna do band individually at each school. So those directors will be working with those students who choose online in what I might consider an independent study mode. Maybe they'll have their lessons planned around their open periods, and those will be done virtually. So that's kind of a broad overview on where we're at on the music side. I've got more details in a document, and work with Chase and Kristen to push that out to the community. But that's the highlights of the work that we've done with the music folks.
Thanks, Scott. So otherwise, board, that brings us to the conclusion of our presentation around Return to Learn tonight. I think to obviously summarize it for people that are listening, or just to try to point a direction of where we're going. Obviously, we had the conversation around the lawsuit in the beginning to challenge the interpretation of 2310, but the recommendation from the team here is to start in our 50% hybrid model that does keep us in compliance with the current interpretation of the law, and to do that A-B split that we've talked about several times as part of our plan. And so we've continued to work on that as we went throughout, and as we've exhausted those other efforts, as I stated in our comments at the beginning. And so we would be happy to answer any questions you might have, or obviously would love to have a motion to be able to move forward and give some consistency and some start to how we're going to begin the school year and move forward here. You did have that conversation around metrics in the last portion of the meeting as well. And so if there's additional conversation or thought that you wanted to have there about what we can or could not do, be happy to entertain any of that as well. Thank you.
All right, Matt, so I have 3 questions. I think they're fairly short and easy, so I'll ask those first, but then I'll come back with my comments on kind of our start of our year. I'll kind of go in reverse order as we went through the plan. So watching the comments come in, a lot of folks had kind of the same question I did. I know that prior to COVID, I was always under the impression, right, that my student has a fever, they're staying home, and it's listed in our stay-at-home guidelines if they have fever and something else. And that seems to be different than what we've always done in the past. And so I guess I would see that there's a couple of symptoms in there that I kind of question as to whether they need to be in conjunction with another one. So why was am I wrong that fever wasn't a standalone thing prior to now? And should it be?
No, you're not wrong on that. And I don't think Jessica's on here, but I think those are symptoms that and again, I'm not a doctor. We pulled those from the guidance from the DE about as they reflect for COVID symptoms, Sean. And so, that's related specifically to what the DE is saying regarding COVID symptomatic individuals is what they look for. And I don't know why the breakdown was of some things being high and some things being low risk. Kate, you might be able to talk to that a little bit more, but these are specifically as they relate to COVID-19 and trying to flatten the spread of that among our students. Kate, you want to add something to that piece?
Right, and those came directly from the state in relation to COVID. Our nurses, though, have talked about how do we delineate this, because it is in conflict with symptoms in which we tell students to stay home, whether they have a fever, diarrhea, vomiting, any one of those would be cause to stay home. So we'll need to work through the guidance we're receiving from the state and also then the guidance that we are giving out as a district to determine how to move forward with that. So we'll need to continue some conversations.
Okay, I appreciate it. It seems to me that this sort of overrides current local practice. And, as we've just had a lengthy conversation on what our local things are, local control. So I would like to, hold true to that. And it seems to me that fever specifically is a standalone thing. The second question I have, maybe for Dwayne, and this has come up in the past in previous meetings, but I'd kind of like to get an update based on where we're kind of looking at numbers right now. The questions in the past has been, will we be utilizing the portables? And if so, will they have the running water needed to do all the hand washing and everything else that we're putting in our mitigation steps?
Well, we do anticipate using the portable classrooms. Some of them do have running water, the 10-plex and the 6-plex. There are only a couple of the smaller units that do. And we're investigating the use of portable hand sanitizers. We have I think 100 of them either built or on order or here soon. That's what I was told yesterday. So in lieu of sinks, we'll have to use hand sanitizer in those units.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was just curious that with the smaller numbers, maybe we wouldn't have to, but I think if we're still trying to spread out, we want to use all the space we have, but I want to make sure that all those spaces are, safe.
Our assumption is that we're still using every one of those classrooms.
All right, and my third and final question before I get to my comment is, I gotta kind of speak up for my elementary teachers. I'm curious, as I look through those guidelines of the common spaces kind of being closed or at least limited, current previous years, right? The elementary teachers, when kids would go off to specials or whatnot, that's when teachers would have some prep time or even eat their lunch or things like that. I'm just kind of curious how we see their life if the kids are always in that room and never leaving and they can't necessarily get out to somewhere else, or can they go somewhere else? I have that concern for those. So can anybody speak to that a little bit?
Sean, we are planning that when students have PE or music or art, that they will be leaving the classroom and going to those larger space areas to have those specials. But you are right, when the students are having library special or the counselor is working with the class, that will be in the classroom and the teacher will have to be in there probably with them, because we are closing other areas for the teachers to be able to go to.
I guess the one thing I'd add to that, Diane, is that, and we've worked with Brady a little bit about this, and that, we understand that our teachers do need that time and need to prep and need to prepare. And so while specials might look different, we don't want any of our teachers to think that that will eat into their prep time or their duty-free lunch. We are going to develop schedules to make sure that they get those pieces throughout the week and throughout the day. And so while we know it's a unique year and some things might look differently, we do want to ensure that we continue to provide those pieces for our teachers on a daily and weekly basis.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm glad to hear that they'll have some alone time. I mean, I think that'll be very important for the mental well-being of our staff there. So my comments, and I'm probably going to ramble a bit here because I didn't prepare this very much, but I think the struggle that I and, you know, rest of the board for that matter, and all of admin has had throughout this whole process is we are pitting these negative consequences against each other, right? If you go one route and you've got these negative consequences, if you go this other route, you have other negative consequences. And a lot of the comments that have come from families, right, are, you know, they need to have choice, and I appreciate that. And what ends up happening is if we give all of our families choice, then we kind of pull the choice away from our staff, right? If all the families decide they want to be in school, but the staff isn't able to safely do that, right? We're taking that choice away from them. So it's been this very much pitting our families against our staff, and that's a terrible place for us to be in, because I think our teachers and staff and the relationships with the families in our district has always been very strong, and they've had great relationships that they've worked really hard on. And this whole process is really, I don't know, hurting that, right? And I don't know how many of you are fans of like superhero movies, but you know, we get to talking about strange things at work, and we come across of, you know, what would be your superpower if you had a superpower. And you know, I go away from all the normal stuff like flying and invisibility and things like that. I think the superpower I want is to always know the right thing to do or the right thing to say. I think that'd be a fantastic superpower. But I would tell you that COVID was probably would be my kryptonite to that superpower, because I don't think there is the right thing to do or say in this situation. So we're always just trying to do, you know, our best in with whatever we have to work with, the information that we have at any given time. And it's been a struggle. I will say, when we voted, gosh, it was over a month ago now, right, that we voted to start the year online, we knew very little as to what the summer and the fall was going to bring. I think we know more now. But as I sit there and try to think, you know, how do we stop the need to pit, you know, these negative consequences against each other? I think it boils down to, you know, how do we best mitigate against all of those potential dangers to a level where everybody feels at least some level of comfort in whatever our plan is. And so going back to the metrics, I do think that before this conversation is over tonight, I think we do need to really come down on coming up with our own local metrics of how we're going to decide which way we're going to, or when we are going to move between parts on the continuum. And with that, I feel much better for the staff and having choice with the numbers of students and families electing for the different options right now. I feel much better about asking a smaller number staff to be in schools with smaller numbers of teachers than the big unknown that we had a month ago. And so I feel like we are in a better position to offer the choice to our families and also give some choice to our staff. I know that that's not foolproof and not 100%, right? If we don't have a good alignment on the numbers of families signing up for one and the number of teachers signing up for the other one, there's going to be some hard choices there. But I feel we're in a much better place to, you know, try and meet the needs of the majority of our staff and our families. And a month ago, I don't think we're in that place to meet the needs of the majority. I think it was, you know, meeting the needs of a minority and causing potential risks in a lot of places. So I do feel better about where we're at if we vote to go ahead and start in a hybrid model. But I do think that is going to be contingent on us developing the metrics locally for us to say, you know what, it's gotten too bad. we need to pull back, or you know what, it's finally gotten better, and I think we can start to move forward. But that is going to be a critical part for me to go with this decision tonight. I'm done.
Hey, Sean, I'm just going to jump in because I don't have very many meetings left, so I want to get all my questions out there. I have 7 questions, and so I'll just go through them and then have you answer it. So just, there's 7 instead of laying out all 7 and then trying to get the answers. But I did want to say a couple of things before I ask those questions. And one thing, Sean, I have learned in my time as a school board member is that even if you had that superpower to say the right thing, that's impossible. That's not even something that's possible. There's always someone that disagrees with you. As in regards to starting in the hybrid, I'm appreciative that Matt and the team has come to this decision. I know it's not the same decision that we came up with on the 14th, and I'm okay with that. We did make a decision earlier tonight, which I think is the right way. We wanted to get an interpretation of the law from the governor so that we can proceed in accordance with the law. And right now, what we know is that if we started 100% online, and let's say we lost that lawsuit, the governor said that those days won't count. And I really don't want those days to count in our staff. And making those up would be even harder. I'm also very appreciative of the work that Matt has done in his time as an interim superintendent here. And I do not want to put his license on in jeopardy at all through this. And so if this is the way we need to proceed to ensure that that doesn't affect him at all, then I'm okay with that as well. So just kind of on to my questions, and one that I've asked Matt about a few times. When will you let the public know how the split of the A and B is going to go so that they can start planning for which days they will be having kids at home versus at school?
That's a great question, Paul. And so we wanted registration to be able to close tomorrow night so we can get the most accurate split on that as possible. So when Chase has mentioned a couple times about a couple things we'll continue to add into this document, we'll put tonight's version in the e-registration reminder tomorrow, but then we'll have a more comprehensive version that'll go out later the week that we can couple also with those splits. But we wanted to try to wait for those numbers to come in as complete as we could Wednesday night and then develop those splits from there. So by the end of the week would be a fair estimate on that.
Okay. And these questions will kind of jump all over the place, but I'll just follow up with Matt. Can you also explain to the people that I know there's a lot of people out there that anytime you add a position to the administrative staff will say, oh man, there's more money to the admin. But really when you moved Greg into his role and then made the other shifts that you made around the districts, we aren't adding additional dollars into the district to do this. Can you just touch on that?
Yeah, that'll be admin FTE neutral. And so while Greg's position is more district level, as we look at that because of the nature of the program stretching across the district, we do not anticipate incurring additional administrator FTE costs in that. And so we still have some support to try to work out at Northwest about how that goes with Mitch moving to West, but it will not be at an additional admin FTE.
And then this one maybe goes to Chase. I believe staff is getting face shields as well as masks. Students are only getting masks. Can students wear the shield or do they have to wear a face mask?
So the general rule is that they should wear the mask. That's based on the CDC guidance of best practice. Of course, we know there could be circumstances where for one reason or another that a mask might be problematic and that we need to consider a shield for a student. And so we'll consider those on a case-by-case basis, Paul, but the kind of the bottom line starting point is that every student would wear a mask.
And then another one about if a student has to self-quarantine or they're at home for the 14 days and they had chosen to be in school, who teaches that student or how do they get their education for those 14 days that they're away from classroom?
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
We're working on academic protocols for that. And so what we are considering, whether we have singleton cases in the building versus if the building would be moving temporarily to 14 days offsite versus if the district is.
By and large, we know that our students will be able to access their Canvas and Seesaw accounts at the elementary and secondary level. We're working on some finer details to see what additional pieces we could work out for our families.
And then I've got, I think, 3 more. Diane, and when we do fast testing, how is that going to look for students that have chosen the 100% online path? Since I know fast testing usually is a kind of a face-to-face with the teacher, showing them some materials and reading off of that. Can you just explain how that will work for the students that are online?
Mm-hmm. So we will be completing the FAST assessments online as well. So we figured out a way that we can share our screen and the student can be using the material that are on our screen while we're still keeping track of their responses. FAST does caution us that they haven't really used these materials in an online format. So we have to be a little liberal when we're interpreting those results, but we still think that we can get good, accurate information on our students that way.
And then another teaching question. I know you're having teachers sign up to choose if they want to choose online or in person, or how that route's going to go. Will the placement of those teachers be done at the building level or the district level? And the reason I ask that is because usually the district or the school will make those kind of decisions within.
Sure, we'll be
kind of moving people around, but how will that happen in this model?
We'll be assigning teachers to the online model at the district level, of course, in conjunction with our building administrators, but those decisions will be made at a district level.
And just to follow up on that, Chase, is the idea is for the online is to try and keep the student cohorts like together. Is that correct? Like if you have 20 kids from Hoover that choose online in first grade, you're going to try and keep those kids together. Is that correct?
We've been working on this, and we're going to try to keep them as as geographically combined as possible. But there is no guarantee, given the numbers, that we can arrange grade level classes that align specific to a certain building, or that class would have a teacher from that same building either. We're going to do our best to keep them aligned as closely as they can to their home schools, or at least to their region. But just given the numbers, both of students and staff, and how we're trying to abide by that level in the RAM, it's not going to be possible, and it's not something we can say we're going to do across every building at every grade level.
But the hope is that you could try and keep them together. The reason I ask is, for example, if I'm using kindergarten as an example, if one school has 28 kids registered and 7 of them have chosen to be in person, and the rest of them have been chosen to go online, and you had 2 teachers for that originally, would you try and split the 2 teachers to take one group online and the other group to stay in the class, if it's possible to do that?
I mean, I think the easiest way, Paul, is just to answer your question directly, that yes, we hope to do that without giving an example, but we don't want to overpromise, and we don't want families that are enrolling it to think that they're going to be in a cohort that's made up of students from their home school with the teacher from their home school. While we're going to make efforts to staff with that regard, it would be probably premature for me to say that we could do that. And so I'm not trying to avoid the question. I'm just trying to be honest, but again, not overpromise. It looks like Amy's gonna help me out here.
Yeah. I think that there may be a misconception out there that we're going to have our elementary buildings have both on-site classes and online teachers. And that's not, unfortunately, how it's going to work out. So as we work through this puzzle piece of staffing our online program, it's going to impact staffing, of course, at our buildings. Just the sheer amount of families that have elected to go online, it's quite a puzzle to put together. So when we think about even, we know that we're saying, 24 is our threshold for our kindergarten online program. Maybe we're seeing that we have 28 registered at a particular elementary. Well, we're going to group at least 24 of those kiddos in the same class. They'll be with classmates from their same elementary, but we've got to move 4 and most likely attach them then either to another group of 20 that we see from another building, or it could be even several buildings built together for kindergarten. So I just don't want there to be a misconception that we're going to have both online and off-site, on-site and off and online teachers at each one of our buildings. It's not going to be necessarily set up that way.
Sorry, my last question is, will there be times set up online or in person for teachers so that kids can ask them questions? Does that make sense? So for example, if if you're in person school and you only have that, let's say at the secondary level, you only have that teacher for one period, will there be a time to then again reach out to that teacher at some point to connect with them about additional questions you may have, or vice versa? If you're online, will there be time for them to reach out, like have office hours for that teacher to be available to students out of their normal scheduled setting?
Scott, do you want to touch on that a little bit, as you've worked with the secondary team around some of how those questions could get answered or opportunities for that?
Yeah, I would say, Paul, that kids will have synchronous or in-person face-to-face instruction a minimum of twice a week, and 3 times a week, with that AAA model and BB model. We will use the homeroom a little bit when we're not doing the social emotional piece where we could make it in. But Fridays, if you're an online student, Fridays are really designated for interventions and those types of things as well. So most of the direct instruction will occur on Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday, depending upon which period you're in. And so I guess I would just say it varies depending upon what model that you're in, but the answer is yes, we want to provide opportunities for students to connect to their teachers.
And with that, I'm done. So the rest of you can talk now.
So Sean, I think 3 questions. One, we had a request for to fund additional school nursing positions, and I'm very interested in looking into that. I assume we'll have to do that if there's board support for that. We'll have to do that as an agenda item for our next meeting. So I wonder if we get Matt to comment on what the administration's thinking is in terms of providing additional nursing staff for the conditions we're in.
Yeah, and so I'm not going to try to be rude or difficult here, but the honest truth is, if we are going to hire more nurses, then we need to also discuss what we're going to cut. We're not in a situation we can add staffing. You guys went through that when we looked at class size and teachers, and we wanted to be able to add more teachers. And at that time, we hadn't necessarily considered adding nursing staff. And of course we need more nurses. I mean, I think when you look at our allocation throughout our buildings with the amount of nurses we have, it's not near enough. And so nobody is saying they're not supportive of that or not willing to do that, but I think we need to have an honest conversation then on what we're willing to pull back from, or what we're willing to reduce, or what we'd be in the future willing to reduce in that conversation, Charlie. So I just think if we're going to have that conversation, we need to know that's going to impact our funding in a way that's not neutral, and in a way that wouldn't be sustainable if we don't cut something else. And so that's the honest part of it. We could bring up a plan to do that, or some suggestions, certainly.
Well, how about a discussion with the Health and Safety Committee about that, about this issue?
Well, they're going to support it, Charlie. I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, no more nurses is definitely going to be something that's supported, and something I think we would support. I just saying, I think if we're going to add the FTE around the nurses, then we're going to have less FTE somewhere else. When you start talking multiple positions at several $1,000s, that's going to add up quickly. In that, we had $900,000 that we talked about through our negotiations period and about the staffing, and we spent that, right? We put that into the classroom where it needed to be, and now we also have a need for nurses. And so health and safety will be supportive of that. I think we're supportive of that. It's just going to be a difficult conversation about where those funds come from.
Well, when we were doing the budget negotiation and salary negotiation, we were not in a pandemic yet. So I think conditions have changed. And personally, as a board member, I'd be more than willing to look at using some of our reserve funds to meet this specific need, which is why, as I looked at the return to learn plan, there's a very specific set of requirements for nursing staff to do screening and other things that have to be done to keep students safe. So I think conditions have changed since we were looking at the district's financial position back in January and February. So if there's board support, I would certainly propose taking a look at this at a future meeting as soon as possible. The second question is, have we had a chance to talk to the bus drivers yet about their concerns, which emerged back in the spring about the number of kids on buses, and to let them know what the plan is now for that number of kids, where they would be seated and so forth, what measures were being taken to mitigate any possible exposure of bus drivers to additional risk. Have we had a chance to talk to the drivers specifically about those matters?
We have, Charlie. We had a forum with them a couple of weeks ago, and we heard their concerns. We talked through some of their suggestions, let them know where we were at the time. We told them we would circle back once we had a final approval of how the district was going to start the school year, and then have a more detailed conversation on that. I know that Iowa Central itself has been in contact with the bus drivers about some of their plans for how they're going to provide some social distancing for the bus drivers, blocking off a couple of those first rows on the bus before students begin sitting on the bus as one example. But we have had that dialogue. We've told them we'd reach back out to them probably pretty soon if the board does vote to start in a certain model this evening. But we have kept that dialogue open.
Okay, good. And it does look like, as I understand, that they would be looking around 10 to 12 kids maximum on any bus. Am I wrong about that?
No, well, yeah. Yes, that's
yes,
not
I'm wrong.
Yes,
Okay.
you're wrong. Yes, sorry, I didn't know how quite to phrase that, but those numbers are incorrect. How about we start there? You know, in a normal year on our elementary buses, we average between 60 and 65 kids on a bus, and for secondary, we average between 40 and 45. We need to get through the online registration tomorrow, and then we can pull out all the students that are enrolled online and know they are not riding the bus. And then when we look at the split for who will be in the A group and who will be in the B group, that'll give us a better idea of how many students will be on the bus. But if you look at it from the elementary level, let's say, and I gave the analogy earlier about a third, and a third. If an elementary bus usually has 60 kids on it, and we think 20 of those will be online, then 20 of those would be A students and 20 of those would be B students, we'd be looking roughly at that 20 to 22 range. But that also is very dependent on bus routes and school and things like that. So it's not quite as clean. The bus company has set the max number of students on a bus at 41. And that's the guidance they've shared with their drivers. But based on what we're seeing with people enrolling in the online program, my initial thought is that we would have very few buses that would come close to that number of students on a route. But we can bring back additional information to the board on those routes once we have better detail on it.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question is for Brady. Brady, we're proposing a different scenario for starting school than we talked about in July. Mm-hmm. How are we doing with teachers being willing to participate with this amount of online teaching? I'm sorry, in classroom teaching.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. You know, we've worked with the district throughout, you know, the process, and I think, you know, I'm deeply appreciative of the willingness of the school board to join with the litigation that will be sponsored and brought forward by the Iowa State Education Association. And that will seek immediate injunctive relief. And we're hopeful, and I think we have a good case. And I would say, I guess the state has continued since our July 14th vote to play cards that I would probably agree with Janet that seem a little bit retaliatory. And so I think we probably share some of the concerns about students not having their classes count because they're not accredited, we're not accredited as a school, or our hours not getting to count, and administrators, being, penalized. I don't think it's at all an easy situation for anybody. And, I think the hours that people have put in and the stress that people are under, it gets hard, there's no question about it. But, I think I've been proud that the district has every step of the way followed the process that the state has put out. And that's even when the state has changed its process, which is done repeatedly. And frankly, it's quite frustrating that happens. So, given that the willingness of the district to say, yes, we're going to challenge this with the next step, which is the litigation, we see that as the appropriate next step to take. And we've been in compliance with every aspect of the law since March. And so, I think we understand the need to stay, given the potential punitive outcomes of not being in compliance. We're hopeful that the litigation will, take care of that and give us a lot more flexibility at the local level to make decisions, not just now in August or September, but throughout the entire school year. I think that's the significance of the litigation. So, I don't know if that answers it directly. I think it's a really hard question, and I think it's appropriate. I really appreciate that you asked it. And I think the emotions are quite high and anxieties are quite high. And, we just have to continue to work together on every available mitigation strategy, every available, we're going to learn a lot if we're on site, and we have to just be willing to come back together like we do here and spend hours of time saying, how do we do the best that we can in incredibly challenging circumstances. So it's a change. We, have worked with the district to get to this point. So we knew where the recommendation was going to be.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks, Sean.
I have a few questions, if I can go. The first question, and maybe this is a question for Diane, but I just wanted some clarification, especially for the elementary kids. I kind of looked at the minutes of the online program instruction and then compared it to the minutes of the hybrid AB model. And it seems that those kids are getting equal instruction time with a teacher. The only difference is that the online instruction is delivered obviously through a computer, but there's no lesser time that kids are getting if they select into the online learning program. Is that accurate?
Not sure if that's entirely accurate. If you're thinking about if a student were on an AB schedule, so they're in school 3 days a week, 2 or 3 days, that's quite a bit of face-to-face time with teachers compared to if you're completely 100% online, you're getting about 100 minutes. We decided was going to be face-to-face time with teachers, a little more for some kids who might need some interventions. So I think if the kids in the hybrid are going to see the teachers more face-to-face. However, on those off-site days, right, the online kids actually have more minutes. So there is a little bit of balance back and forth, but we sure hope that the synchronous activities that we're providing to kids during those off-site days is also providing them with extended learning as well.
Thank you for that. And then Amy, this is for you. When you were answering Paul's question about the splitting of the school sizes, and you used the 28 kid example, it kind of popped in my head, like, especially, selfishly, because I have young kids too, but say there's 25 kindergartners and then you just have that one kiddo who'd have to get shipped off to a different building. is there any thought that perhaps instead of doing a 24-1 split, we do a 12-13 split or something so that those 1 or 2 kids aren't quite as isolated from their homeschool peers as the rest of their cohorts?
I think that's a really good question, Lisa. I know we're setting up sections in Power School right now to be able to accommodate how we are putting kids for these classes. And Adam, I'm going to pick on you a little bit as we set up these instructions. If we can set them up so that these scenarios don't exist.
Yeah, so basically we're creating the sections that'll accommodate the students in the online program, and then working to provide instructions to staff of the buildings with regard to basically the order in which kids would be enrolled in those online sections. And the point that you raised, Lisa, is one that we've considered as a priority for us. So we don't want to have that singleton kid or even, just a couple kids. If we're trying to group by building, it's difficult, as Chase mentioned earlier, to speak in really general terms because our numbers differ so much in terms of section sizes by grade, by building. But when we're working to build those sections, to your point, if we're looking at, a situation where we have something like you described, we would look at, filling those sections in a way that's going to provide kids with some school peers so that they're not going to be isolated in that sense.
And then my last question is probably for Matt. And I guess I meant to, so hold on, Matt. I want to thank the admin team that I should have started. You guys have worked so hard. And another impressive presentation tonight, lots of questions that I've seen answered. That Return to Learn PowerPoint is just hundreds of hours of work, kind of all in one document. And I'm really grateful for all the time that you all, everyone on this Zoom, and then everyone on your committees that aren't on the Zoom. Thank you so much for your work on this. It's impressive. And I think it speaks to the quality of you all and how much you care about our district and our staff. So that's where I should have started. Shame on me,
Lisa.
Thank you. Last question though, Matt. I've seen a lot of comments online about parents who are struggling of what choice to make. And I think we've got a little under 25% left that haven't registered and they don't know what to do. Am I correct in my understanding if they don't register by tomorrow night for online learning program, then the choice is made for them? That they will be enrolled in the standard enrollment program. And so that's kind of the consequence of not choosing is we will make a choice for you and we will put your students in standard enrollment. Is that accurate?
Right. So if they do not select into that option to join the PK-12 online learning program, then that option will go away in e-registration, and then you'll be registered at your school for whatever model we're in at the time. Obviously, tonight the recommendation is to start in the hybrid model. We anticipate at different points in the year that could look different depending on the time of the year. And so that choice, will essentially be made up for them by 11:59. And I would just say, I understand, folks hesitating. We didn't register our own kids until today about which, model we were looking at because of some of the same challenges that families are dealing with. And so we certainly understand that and understand wanting to have as much information as possible. With the reality of also knowing we are trying to mitigate risk, but it doesn't eliminate all the risk as we said at the beginning. And so we know that challenge and that there's many questions and concerns, and we've done our best to try to answer those. So thanks for the shout out there at the beginning. We know there's still some things that people would like to see, and we hope to continue those conversations over the next couple of weeks. But we do feel like we provide as much information as we can to give people the best tool to make the decision by tomorrow night as possible.
So with that, I'll just say, I'm kind of in the same boat as everyone who's spoken already. This is not what we voted on before, and I don't think it's the ideal, but I think it is important to follow the law as the law is currently being interpreted, and we can settle our disagreements in court. But going into this hybrid model, at least for now, is I think what we need to do. I will say that's a huge asterisk by at least for now. I don't know if anyone else has gone to coronavirus.iowa.gov today to see our numbers in Johnson County, but we are reporting a 33% positivity rate today. That's today's numbers. So I think all of this comes with a huge, unknown. We don't know what we're going to look like on September 8th. But for now, I think this is the decision that we have to make.
I'm just
I'll
going
go
to
and jump. Oh,
go ahead, Ruthina. Go
you
ahead.
sure? Thanks, Janet. I'll be super quick because most of my questions have been answered. But I do want to start following Lisa, saying thank you to the admin team, as well as the staff and teachers who have been working really hard on our return to learn plan. I know that, again, we didn't originally envision ourselves starting with the hybrid model, but seeing what you all have proposed and knowing that a lot of our families have signed up for the online classes, I'm feeling a lot more comfortable than what I was July 17th. Not 100% comfortable because there's still risk. I mean, we're still in a pandemic, as I believe Scott or Matt mentioned tonight, that we cannot eliminate all of our risk. But with that being said, just a couple of quick questions. What type of cleaning supplies will actually be in our classrooms? Because I know that they'll be responsible for cleaning in between things, or especially with kids being in a room for quite a bit more than what they're used to. Can we talk a little bit about what classrooms will be equipped with?
You want me to take that, Chase?
Please, Dwayne. Yep.
Typically what you'll find are spray bottles with an alcohol solution, Ruthina, and the appropriate cleaning rags, for lack of a better word. We will not have access to that many sanitizing wipes. We do use sanitizing wipes in our lunchrooms. It's a food grade, but we anticipate in the classrooms that we'll use an alcohol-based solution with the appropriate cleaning rags.
Okay.
And we'll also provide gloves to the staff and the students that will be using those.
Thank you. And I know that our staff will be screened every day coming into the building, but not necessarily not our students, but will our teachers or staff in classrooms be offered a thermometer at least if they want to do quick scans as kids enter the room or something of that nature? I mean, or would that be something that they would have to cover out of their own pockets to make them feel safe?
We have not ordered a thermometer for every classroom. We are going to provide them some guidance that goes along with the health room guidance to kind of give them a step-by-step of what to look for and what questions they should ask their students as they come in determining whether or not they should send a student to the health room, Ruthina. But no, we're not providing a thermometer for every class.
Okay. And then last is just my comment. I would like to have that nurse discussion on the next agenda, just so we can get a sense of, I know that it would mean we would have to look at cutting something, but I think we need to know what those costs are. And, that's a question that's been raised not only by a board member, but I know the community will probably want to know what does that equate to? What are we talking about cutting? Are we talking about if we want to hire 5 nurses, does that equate evenly to 5 other FTEs? I would just like to get a sense of what the dollar amount is.
Sure. And, Charlie brought up a good point at the end of his comments too, Ruthina. And I think that immediately sometimes people jump to when we say, we just need to have a conversation about where we don't put a resource to do something else, that means we're against it. And so we aren't against bringing in more nurses. I think what we are against is putting the district in a position where we spend into a reserve and then we don't have a plan to get out of it. And so I think if there's some permission in a short-term basis for the superintendent to spend below the 5% threshold we've traditionally looked at, that's good. But then we also need to understand that there's some long-term consequences to that. And eventually there will be a budget cut that follows something like that. And so I just think it's important for people to be aware of that, and that we have the open conversation around what that means, because the district's been able to stay financially solvent for a period of time because of our enrollment growth. We have questions around our enrollment this year and if we will be up students and how we've been able to kind of continue to get by. And so those are just reality conversations for us. I do 100% agree we need to look at the nurse staff, and we can certainly bring that back and a plan to do that and what that would mean and what the cost would entail. So we'll have that ready to go for next week.
Thank you.
Real fast, if I could just make a couple comments. The nurse question, I don't know if we could look at funds from the School District Foundation for sort of temporary nurses, as a way to maybe fund things for a short period of time without having to go into the general fund. It's just an idea. I don't know if that's possible or not. But before, what I was thinking before the nurse conversation, which I do think is an important one to continue, is just I am heartened by the number of families who've signed up for the online only, just because it's going to minimize the number of students in the building, which is going to allow social distancing. It's going to be better for buses. I think it's going to be better for teachers. I think it's alleviating some of the risk by minimizing the number of students in the classrooms, and so that's making me feel better about this hybrid model. And I am so deeply appreciative of the time the admin team, teachers have put into building their online courses, but also preparing to teach in person. This has been a Herculean set of activities to get us to this point. And once registration closes, I'm fully appreciative of the work the admin team has to do all of the scheduling that we've been talking about. That is not an easy thing. I'm just kind of in awe at what that jigsaw puzzle is that you have to put together in a really short amount of time and communicate effectively. So thanks in advance for all of that work. I do want to note that I think a goal of ours does need to be stability as best we can. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many families have chosen the continuous online model, is at least for a trimester, they've got some stability and knowledge of how school will feel, what learning will feel like for their family. I think with the fewer number of students in the buildings, that gives us more opportunity to manage. But for me, one of the reasons why I felt strongly about supporting ISEA's litigation is that I do feel like we need to have that control to be able to make decisions once we move into the physical learning activity. I do think we need to start with the model that's been proposed to be in compliance, but I do feel strongly that we need to have an opportunity as a school board to make decisions based on what's happening in our particular community, especially given our population with the University of Iowa here and the influx of students coming in. And so, but even with this idea of, even if the injunction is granted, I don't think that the desire would necessarily be to just go and move everyone back to online. I think there's a sense that once we vote and we decide what we're going to do, there's a commitment, at least on my part, to maintaining some continuity as best we can while we manage the conditions that emerge in the coming days and weeks. And so I do think we need stability. I think we need as much continuity for families, for teachers, for everyone engaged in this activity. And I just know that that's an important requirement as we, monitor and manage our way through all of this. I think everyone has the best of intentions. I do think that we're going to have to be prepared for some kind of change. And I think we also need to have some grace, knowing that despite all of the amazing planning and preparation that have gone into getting ready for teaching, there will be things that happen that we had not planned for, and we just need to be flexible. We need to work together to solve these problems together, because everyone's intentions are very good here. We need to give ourselves some grace as we work through these next weeks once we get into the scheduling and once we get into classes starting, because there will be things that happen that we did not expect to happen. And it's going to continue to be challenging for us. And I'm just really grateful to be in a district with such amazing teachers, administrators, school board members, community members, folks around us that are supporting us, understanding that we're trying to thread a needle here and support as many students as we possibly can. And it's not easy. And I just acknowledge that. But I do want to thank Matt, you and your team for the amazing work that you've done. Brady, to you and your team for the amazing work that you've done. And just let's all keep that spirit going together, because it's going to continue to be hard. And we just need to continue to work through things and have some grace along the way.
Thanks, Jenna.
I'll just shortly comment here, but first off, to thank the admin for this work. I mean, in a normal year, we're freaking out about staffing right now because we don't have the numbers and we don't know what it's going to be. And a lot of kids show up after Labor Day, and, you know, maybe by the 1st of October, everything's settled down. So to do this in this time with, you know, 76% of folks registered with this major decision to make, I just really appreciate all your work. And to my fellow board members and the staff, and Brady and your folks as well. This is a tough decision to make. These have all been really tough decisions. I was really hopeful, you know, when we made our initial decision that we could go really slow and gather more data and more information, let things develop medically as we learn more about this virus. And then with all that's happened, you know, I now can appreciate, you know, when we're dealing with a third of the kids, being able to do that in as safe a way as we can. I really agree, you know, with Janet's comment that we have to provide some stability. And so I also agree we should start with this hybrid model. Depending on what happens with the injunction, we should stick with the hybrid model. But as Sean, you know, initially said, and other people have said, those metrics are going to be really important for me. You know, I'm really going to need to know, and I want solid metrics. And I know stuff is out there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel as to how we're going to make the decision to go all online, and then when we return. And I'm looking forward to that. And again, just appreciate everybody's work. Nobody wanted to get into this, and here we are. And I think people here have been doing this with grace and empathy, and I want to continue that.
Thanks, JP.
Trying to give the appropriate amount of silence. See if somebody's going to jump in.
I do have two follow-ups, Sean. Because like I said, I want to ask all my questions while I have the time. Two things, Mac. The recordings from last night's 2 sessions, those are available online on YouTube, correct?
Kristen, do we have those up yet? I know we were getting emails throughout the day and you guys were working on those. Are those back up so people can access them yet, or do we need to hold off on that till tomorrow? I do think they're up.
They've been uploading this evening, and I think we have word that 1 is complete. I should have them posted to the Return to Learn website yet tonight. It's just taking a while to get them uploaded for some reason. So okay. They will be posted, and I'll send a message out soon.
Super, thanks. I heard those were very informative, so I know people wanted to listen to them if they weren't able to make it. The other question I had, Matt, and this is more, I guess, long-term, looking down the road, but I know the new schedule has a day off after each trimester, and I don't know if that's built in. As we've said that that's the point in time that people can choose maybe to go to a different path, online or back in person or whatever. Will you guys be using that time, I guess, to look, or will you be asking them ahead of that time, just so you can make adjustments in staff as needed, if needed? You know, if kids are coming back in at a rate or going out at a rate, you know, I would assume staff may need to be adjusted, and I'm assuming that's why you have those times there.
Yeah, so that's why we tried to use the trimester as those transition points. So sorry, I forgot to address that earlier as we were talking about that. But yeah, we'll have to be honest, we don't have that process fully vetted out or worked through yet about what that will look like, but there will have to be some lead time so we could reposition staffing and students accordingly to the to what they would like to do that following trimester. So we'll have to work through that, but there will need to be some transition time and some requests probably to go back to students and staff in advance of that trimester change. So that's the best answer we can give right now.
And then Sean, I took that silence to be that everyone was kind of done talking. And so I would like to move that we accept the admin's recommendation for starting the year in the hybrid model, as well as the 100% online for those who choose.
Second.
I'll allow it for more conversation. I was hopeful to, maybe it can be a separate motion, but as part of this, I would like to have somewhere in there some direction of this is the way we're going to go pending the creation of our own local metrics, or in addition, maybe not pending, but of creating our own local metrics to decide how we're going to move from one to another. Ask, Paul Martinez, since you made the motion, second it, do you feel okay with amending the motion, or would you rather do two separate pieces? I feel like that other piece is important. It's just whether or not you want it to be attached or a standalone thing.
I guess I'm okay with either way. The reason that I didn't put it in there is because I think people just want an answer on how we're going to start. And that's a definitive answer on how we're going to start. The second piece I definitely think is important to know how we're going to move from one to the other. But I guess this was just more of a motion to, this is how we're going to start the year, so people have that in their head.
How do you feel about that, Matt?
Obviously, you guys directing us to bring metrics back. That's what we'll do. We'll bring something back there. I know there's other local districts that are working through some of those same challenges right now. I do think we need a direction on how we're going to start so we can start to put these things together formally and so our people know. And so whether those are separated out or together, I think we have clear direction from you guys to do that. But I do think since it's different than the state's guidance around those metrics, if you're going to task us to do something different or outside of that, I do think it'd probably be appropriate to do that through a motion.
All right. Well, we have a motion and a second. I'm inclined to have us go ahead with the vote. And if somebody would like to revisit the other part shortly thereafter, that I would appreciate that. Is there any further comments then on the motion on the floor? All right. Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. Shannon, I'm not getting yours. Oh, got it. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
And so what I'm thinking is that, we have give direction to the administration to create these metrics, which would then come back. I think we'd have to take another vote on the actual metrics that or what the plan is on how to use those metrics. But I think to Matt's point, so we've mentioned multiple times here, right? We've had some questions on, retaliation from the state level, right? So I think it's fair enough for us as a board to make that direction official. So I'm okay with directing that via a board vote. So if anyone wants to take a crack at a motion, I would entertain that.
How about something like this, Sean? I move that the board direct the superintendent to develop metrics for safe opening and closing of our district's schools based on positivity cases in Johnson County. Is that along the lines of what we were looking for?
Or how about something like local public health data? I don't, you know, I don't want to get too specific, you know, on the wording before we kind of know exactly what we're looking at. So positivity rate versus some other.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important that we emphasize that we need to base this on the local conditions.
All right, so it seems like Janet was speculating as opposed to making an actual motion, which is probably a good thing since JP jumped in there. So we're still on task. So I do think that we need to say something along the lines of, you know, direction of metrics based on local data to determine, you know, opening and closing of schools or the district. I agree that I don't know that we want to pigeonhole exactly what those metrics are. I think that's why we're directing the administration to do that.
What if we just say Johnson County data?
To me, what we're asking though is it's not about what data set we're going to use. It's about what the data is going to tell us or what we want to see from the data. So to me, it's more developing our own metric system to establish transition points between online learning, hybrid, and in-person instruction.
Yes.
I like that.
Make a motion, what you just said.
Then I guess I would move that we direct the interim superintendent to create a metric system by which we would use as a transition point to determine the method of delivery instruction.
Kim, did you get all that?
Yeah, it wasn't.
Give me
as
just a
good. I'm
second.
sorry, Kim.
That was good.
Let Kim catch up on typing and then we'll ask if there's a second.
Well, Kim's going to repeat that, right? So that we
Well,
know.
okay, let me tell you what I have so far. Motion to direct the superintendent to create a metric system to establish transition points for
The selection of the instruction delivery model.
Yeah.
Second.
Got it.
Thanks, Paul. Anybody have any more comments before we move to a vote? All right, Kim.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
And Matt, you can just clarify this since we just passed those two motions, that the reason we don't have the metrics before we decide what model to go to is because we're following what the state has said until we get a clear ruling on what we can do. And in that meantime, we're developing our metrics should we come out ahead in that lawsuit. So the reason we're doing it this way is because we are following the state guidance, and then we're hoping to develop our own should we be allowed to have home rule.
Exactly. So right now we're in compliance with the 50% requirement as interpreted currently with 2310, the Senate file. And so if we have different metrics that are adopted, if the district would then pull the trigger per se on those metrics without permission from the state, we can talk about how some of that language is worded next week too. Do we request permission to move to a different model from the state? And if denied permission, then what does the board do? All of that can be in the language, but you're exactly right, Paul. I mean, right now, everything we're doing is following the state guidance. And so this is really to create a framework that if we either do not win, you know, this potential litigation as a district and have a different interpretation of 2310 and the 50% requirement, or if the district feels like it needs to exert some flexibility around different metrics about when to close a building or the district, then we have a position to do that from. We're not going to produce a metric that's going to affect the start decision or anything at this point. And so we know, based on at least what the COVID-19 Iowa data source shows for local public districts, our 14-day rolling positivity rates at 7%. I know there's been questions around that, but that number's not changing. We know what our decision to start the school year is. This is really for guidance for us moving forward as either rates increase or decrease in our community and about what to do.
Thanks, Matt. Going to something a little less heavy. We just have our director of liaison report. There's a lot of Zoom meetings that people are having. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to any of the things that they've done in the last month. Okay.
Sean, sorry, I was trying to figure out what to click where. I just want to commend again Matt's participation in the Center for Worker Justice and the Black Voices Project groups. I've heard, from people in that group that your being there, Matt, makes a substantial difference in how they're viewing the district and our abilities to try and our efforts to try to address the issues within those groups. So I really want to state that publicly, Matt.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that. I think we've been able to identify some quick things we could try to work on and also get at the root of some deeper problems that are going to take a longer time for us to fix, but appreciate you saying that.
And I should also point out that Lisa and Ruthina have also participated in the Black Voices Project, as well as a number of teaching staff and principals.
Thanks for that, Charlie. Appreciate that. If we're ready, we can move into agenda setting. The only thing on there, or the only meeting on there, is next Tuesday's meeting. And we can talk about future weeks, but we'll go through the 25th meeting agenda here real quick. It has all the standard stuff, on our consent. There's a couple extra things on there. And we would be looking at getting our fourth quarter financial reports. I believe it was Paul had asked for kind of an update on where we're at on our last FMP project things before he gets to leave, so we can get that done. And then again, just like with Steve, it doesn't say roast, it just says resignation. And I really want agenda items to say roast when people are leaving, but we're just not doing it. Is there anything, it sounds like we've talked about adding a discussion topic on nurses, or at least the financial impact of what adding FTE would be in that regard. If there are other items that folks want to add on there.
I have one. I would like a discussion item on there about returning to in-person board meetings. If we're starting school on September 8th, I think we as a board need to start in-person meetings.
Can we give a cheer about that? So,
I'm sorry, what?
Say, could we give a cheer about that?
I don't know if it's, I mean, hey, if that's what you're feeling, go with it. But in all seriousness, I would like to have that discussion on when we plan to, move at least where we're gathering in person, and if there's possible to have an option for the public to watch via Zoom still, because we won't be able to have 600 plus people in the boardroom, but I still would like people to stay as engaged as they have been, knowing that we can't have a full crowd.
And I was just going to add on to that, but I understand the sentiment of returning to the in-person, but I do appreciate, I think we had over 700 people on this meeting earlier tonight, and Zoom has allowed us to reach an audience live that maybe we haven't ever been able to do before.
Right.
And so there's ups and downs.
Yeah, but that's why I mentioned figuring out an option to still have that, because I think it's possible.
Yeah, we can bring some
we can do
solutions
it.
for you next week, guys. So sorry to talk over you there, but we can bring a couple different options. Or maybe not a couple different options, but an option about how we could do both. So makes sense.
One thing, Sean, possibly that we could add on there that we had talked about at our board retreat, and I don't know if it's too soon, but if we could have an action item possibly on the superintendent or interim superintendent contract as something that we could take action on maybe before. Me personally, I would like to take action on it before I leave, but if that's not an option, I'm okay with that too.
Okay, we could put that in there as a placeholder. I know there's a couple steps we wanted to take before we brought something before the whole board again, but I do think they're minor steps and could probably get completed rather quickly, so we could throw that in there.
Sean,
obviously, we need a return to learn.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I don't see that on the agenda. We just talked about metrics and stuff, so that needs to be on there.
I had something else in my head and now I've lost it. It's not surprising. So I think, that's quite a bit there for the 25th. I know we are probably looking at having a meeting on the 1st, continuing the weekly meetings. I think the week, before school starts is probably an important time to have us have another special meeting that's solely focused on return to learn. So I would expect that to happen. It's not on there on agenda setting, but I think we can all expect that to happen. And then we'll have to see, what happens, on the 8th and on after that as we do start school and start to see different changes. So is there anything else we need to hit for sure next Tuesday? Any homework that we need to assign Paul in his last week?
I'm taking classes. I have homework already this week, so maybe go light.
Fair enough. All right. If there are no further comments, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, guys. Good night.
Thank you, everyone, for all the work.
Take care, folks.